I walked into my sister Amanda's celebration party wearing a simple black dress from Target, clutching my phone like a lifeline, while designer gowns swirled around me in the lavish Denver suburb mansion. Amanda had just landed the biggest interior design contract of her career with the Grandview hotel chain, and the house buzzed with successful relatives, business contacts, and wealthy family friends. My brother-in-law Derek immediately sneered at my appearance, while my parents Margaret and Robert shot me those familiar disapproving looks that said everything about what they thought of my life choices. The atmosphere crackled with hostility, directed squarely at me, the family disappointment, but I held my phone tighter, knowing a secret that would completely shatter their assumptions. The moment I stepped through the marble foyer, I felt the familiar weight of being the family outcast settling on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. The party was in full swing with at least 50 guests mingling in Amanda's perfectly decorated living room, sipping champagne and admiring the crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars. I tried to blend into the background, but avoiding attention in my family had always been impossible. I was heading toward the kitchen when I overheard my mother Margaret talking to Mrs. Henderson, our longtime neighbor, near the grand piano. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when discussing family disappointments. "Oh, Frida," Margaret said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "She never amounted to anything you know, still living in that tiny apartment downtown, barely scraping by. It breaks my heart really seeing one daughter soar like Amanda, while the other just drifts through life without direction." Mrs. Henderson made sympathetic clucking sounds. "Some children just don't have the same drive, I suppose." "Exactly," Margaret continued, oblivious to my presence just 15 feet away. "Amanda inherited the family ambition. Frida, well, she's always been content with mediocrity, works some dead-end tech support job answering phone calls all day. We keep hoping she'll find her way, but at 28, I'm starting to think this is just who she is." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd heard variations of this speech countless times over the years. What made it worse was knowing that everything she was saying was completely false. I wasn't struggling at all. In fact, I was probably more financially successful than Amanda, Derek, and my parents combined. But I'd learned long ago that my family didn't want to hear about my achievements. I owned Morrison Technologies, a highly specialized tech consulting firm that worked exclusively with luxury commercial properties. We provided comprehensive digital infrastructure solutions for high-end hotels, resorts, and corporate headquarters across the western United States. My company had been quietly thriving for 3 years, generating millions in annual revenue, but I deliberately kept my success private after some painful early experiences with family jealousy and sabotage. Amanda appeared at the center of the room, absolutely glowing in a stunning emerald silk gown that probably cost $3,000. She was holding court with a group of admirers, including several people I recognized as prominent Denver business owners and socialites. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled in loose waves, and her makeup looked professionally done. She embodied everything my parents wanted in a daughter: confident, successful, socially connected, and undeniably beautiful. "Thank you all so much for celebrating with Derek and me tonight," Amanda announced, her voice ringing with practiced charm. "As you know, I just signed the most incredible contract with the Grandview hotel chain. They've chosen my firm to handle interior design for their entire Pacific Northwest expansion, 6 luxury properties worth over $8 million in design work." The crowd erupted in applause and congratulations. I watched from my corner near the bookshelf, noting how Amanda's eyes swept the room, acknowledging every important guest with personal attention. When her gaze passed over me, there was no recognition, no inclusion. I might as well have been part of the furniture. Derek appeared beside his wife, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored navy suit. His dark hair was slicked back, and his smile had that predatory quality of someone who viewed every conversation as a potential business opportunity. He wrapped his arm around Amanda's waist possessively. "Let me introduce some family members to our guests," Derek announced loudly. This is Amanda's father, Robert, who owns Henderson and Associates, the premier accounting firm downtown, and her mother, Margaret, who runs Elite Catering, the most exclusive catering company in Denver. Both my parents preened under the attention, basking in the reflected glory of Amanda's success. Robert straightened his tie and began discussing tax strategies with a group of business owners, while Margaret launched into stories about catering high society events. Derek continued his introductions, pointing out Amanda's cousin David, who was apparently crushing it in real estate, and Amanda's college roommate Sarah, who just opened her third yoga studio franchise. Every introduction came with glowing descriptions of professional accomplishments and social status. I waited for my turn, and waited. Derek's eyes passed right over me as if I were invisible. The introductions concluded without a single mention of my existence. My phone buzzed with a text message from James Harrison, my business partner and the co-founder of Morrison Technologies. The message was urgent. Hotel execs want final approval on the Grandview infrastructure deal. They need confirmation tonight. Are you available? I quickly typed back, at family event. Can handle it remotely if needed. His response was immediate. This is the big one, Frida. $80 million over 3 years. They want to move fast. $80 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family celebrated Amanda's $8 million design contract, I was managing a deal worth 10 times that amount. But here, I stood invisible and dismissed, listening to my mother tell strangers about my supposed failures. The party continued around me, a whirlwind of congratulations and networking. I watched Derek work the room like a professional politician, collecting business cards and making connections. He had a talent for making people feel important, laughing at their jokes, and remembering details about their lives and businesses. But when he passed near me while escorting a group of potential clients to the bar, his demeanor changed completely. Frida, he said in a tone barely above a whisper, but loud enough for his companions to hear, could you help the catering staff in the kitchen? They seem overwhelmed and you know it would be good for you to contribute something to the evening. The suggestion hung in the air like a slap. He was essentially telling a room full of successful business people that I was suitable for kitchen work, that my highest and best use at my own sister's celebration was as unpaid help. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but I'd learned over the years that fighting back in public only made things worse. My family had perfected the art of making me look unreasonable if I defended myself, so I simply nodded and headed toward the kitchen. My phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. But as I walked away, I caught a fragment of Derek's conversation with his new acquaintances. Amanda's sister, he was explaining in a stage whisper. Bit of a family project, you know. We try to include her, help her feel useful. She's had some struggles finding her place in the world. The group made understanding murmurs, and I realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't just casual family dynamics. This was a systematic campaign to define me as the family failure to position Amanda's success against my supposed shortcomings. Every gathering, every introduction, every family story was crafted to reinforce this narrative. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something extraordinary while they dismissed me as irrelevant. Morrison Technologies wasn't just successful, it was becoming a powerhouse in the luxury hospitality tech sector. Major hotel chains competed for our services. Fortune 500 companies sought our expertise. I'd created something my family couldn't even imagine, let alone understand. As I reached the kitchen doorway, my phone buzzed again. Another message from James. Grandview CEO wants to accelerate timeline. This could be our biggest breakthrough yet. I looked back at the party, at Amanda glowing in the spotlight, at Derek networking aggressively at my parents, holding court with their success stories. They had no idea that the shy, unsuccessful daughter they'd written off was about to make a decision that would change everything. The kitchen staff was indeed busy preparing additional appetizer trays and refreshing champagne supplies, but I didn't join them. Instead, I stood in the doorway watching my family's celebration and waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth they'd refused to see for years. The kitchen hummed with professional efficiency as elite catering staff prepared endless trays of gourmet appetizers. I recognized several of the workers from previous family events, and they greeted me with genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with the reception I'd received from my own relatives. Maria, the head chef, immediately offered me a glass of sparkling cider and asked about my life with real interest. "How's the tech work going, mija?" she asked while arranging prosciutto-wrapped asparagus on silver platters. "Last time we talked, you were working on some big hotel project." I smiled, appreciating her genuine curiosity. "It's going really well, actually. Better than I ever expected." Before I could elaborate, Amanda's voice echoed from the living room, calling everyone to attention for another announcement. Maria and I moved to the kitchen doorway to listen along with the other catering staff, who were genuinely invested in the evening's success since my mother employed them regularly. Amanda stood on the marble steps leading to the second floor, using the elevation to command the room's attention. The lighting caught her emerald dress perfectly, and she looked every inch the successful businesswoman. Derek positioned himself beside her, one hand on the ornate iron railing, the other holding a champagne flute. "I want to share something special with all of you," Amanda began, her voice carrying easily across the crowded room. "This Grandview Hotel contract represents more than just business success. It's the culmination of years of building relationships, establishing trust, and proving myself in a competitive industry." The guests listened with rapt attention. These weren't just random partygoers, these were Denver's business elite. I recognized at least a dozen faces from the local business journal, including 2 city council members, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and several development company executives. The Grandview chain isn't just expanding into the Pacific Northwest. Amanda continued, her confidence building with each word. They're creating a new standard for luxury hospitality. 6 properties in Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver, each one a flagship destination that will redefine what travelers expect from premium accommodations. She gestured toward Derek, who stepped forward with practiced timing. "My husband has been instrumental in this success, helping me navigate the complex negotiations and contract details. Together, we're building something extraordinary." The crowd erupted in applause, and I found myself clapping along, genuinely happy for my sister's achievement, even if the celebration felt exclusionary. But as Amanda continued describing the project details, something began nagging at the back of my mind. The Seattle property will feature 250 luxury suites. Amanda explained, each equipped with state-of-the-art technology, smart room controls, and integrated entertainment systems. The Portland location will include a world-class spa with digital wellness tracking, automated climate controls, and immersive guest experience platforms. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't just generic hotel features, these were specific technological implementations that Morrison Technologies had designed and proposed. I'd spent months developing comprehensive digital infrastructure plans for luxury hotel chains, creating custom solutions that integrated guest services, operational efficiency, and cutting-edge amenities. Amanda continued, "The Vancouver property will showcase our most ambitious design, yet a fully integrated smart hotel experience where guests can control everything from lighting and temperature to entertainment and dining reservations through seamless mobile connectivity." Every detail she mentioned aligned perfectly with proposals I'd submitted to hotel executives over the past 6 months. The smart room controls the integrated entertainment systems, the digital wellness tracking. These were all Morrison Technologies, innovations that I'd personally developed and pitched. Derek took over the presentation, his voice filled with pride and authority. "What makes this project truly special is the level of technological sophistication involved. We're not just designing beautiful spaces, we're creating intelligent environments that anticipate guest needs and exceed expectations at every touchpoint." I felt dizzy as the realization washed over me. The technology Derek was describing so confidently was my technology. The integrated systems Amanda was taking credit for were solutions I'd spent countless hours perfecting. But how was that possible? How could they know about proprietary Morrison technologies, innovations? My phone buzzed urgently and I glanced down to see a message from James. Frida, the Grandview executives are asking about coordination with design teams. They specifically mentioned someone named Amanda Morrison. Any relation? My heart pounded as the pieces began falling into place. Amanda Morrison. She'd been using my maiden name professionally, and somehow the hotel executives had connected her design work with my technology proposals. But Amanda had no idea about the connection, and neither did the rest of my family. I'd recommended Amanda's design services to Grandview executives months ago during preliminary discussions about the technology infrastructure. It had been a gesture of family loyalty, a way to help my sister's career while keeping my own involvement private. I'd simply mentioned that I knew an excellent interior designer who might be perfect for their expansion project. At the time, I'd thought it was a small favor connecting a talented designer with potential clients. I had no idea the recommendation would lead to Amanda's biggest contract ever. And now she was standing in front of Denver's business elite, celebrating a success that existed because of my behind-the-scenes influence. The irony was staggering. While my family dismissed me as a failure, I'd quietly orchestrated my sister's greatest professional achievement. The design contract, she was celebrating the technological features, she was describing the client relationships, she was leveraging all of it traced back to Morrison Technologies and my carefully cultivated industry connections. But there was another layer to this situation that made it even more complex. The Grandview Hotel chain's expansion project wasn't just about interior design. It was fundamentally dependent on the digital infrastructure that Morrison Technologies was contracted to provide. The smart room controls, integrated entertainment systems, and mobile connectivity solutions Amanda was describing couldn't exist without the underlying technological framework my company was building. Derek's voice pulled me back to the present moment. The best part about this project is the long-term potential. Grandview Hotels is planning additional expansions over the next 5 years, and Amanda's firm is positioned to handle all their design needs. We're talking about sustainable, scalable growth that will establish us as leaders in luxury hospitality design. My phone buzzed again. Another message from James. Hotel executives want to schedule coordination meetings between design and tech teams. They're impressed with the Morrison connection and want to streamline project management. Can you handle liaison duties? I stared at the message, realizing that I was about to become the liaison between my own company and my sister's firm without either side understanding the family connection. Amanda would be working directly with Morrison Technologies, never knowing she was collaborating with the sister she'd spent years dismissing as unsuccessful. The celebration continued around me, but I felt increasingly detached from the festivities. My family was toasting Amanda's success, completely unaware that their failure daughter had made it all possible. They were praising her business acumen, never suspecting that her biggest achievement had been gift-wrapped by someone they considered inconsequential. Margaret raised her champagne glass, high commanding attention for her own toast. "To Amanda," she announced with tears in her eyes, "who has always been our shining star. From the time she was a little girl, we knew she was destined for greatness. She has the vision, the talent, and the determination to turn dreams into reality." The guests raised their glasses, enthusiastically echoing Margaret's sentiments with hearty agreement. Robert stepped forward to add his own words of praise. "Amanda represents the best of what hard work and natural ability can achieve," he declared. "She's built her success through merit, talent, and sheer force of will. We couldn't be prouder to call her our daughter." The contrast was impossible to ignore. Here was my family publicly celebrating one daughter's achievements while completely overlooking the other daughter's contributions that had made those achievements possible. They were praising Amanda's business acumen while dismissing my own far more substantial business success as irrelevant. But the most painful part was realizing that Amanda genuinely didn't know about my involvement in her success. She wasn't maliciously taking credit for my work, she was simply unaware of the connections I'd facilitated. The hotel executives had approached her design firm based on my recommendation, but they'd done so through intermediaries and industry contacts. Amanda believed she'd earned this contract purely through her own networking and talent. Derek wrapped up the formal presentation with a flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating the most talented interior designer in Denver, my brilliant wife, Amanda Morrison Chambers. The room erupted in applause and congratulations once again, but this time I couldn't bring myself to clap along. The weight of the situation was becoming overwhelming. I was standing in my family's mansion, watching them celebrate a success I'd secretly orchestrated, while they continued to treat me as a disappointing afterthought. My phone vibrated with another urgent message from James. Grandview wants to accelerate everything. They're talking about signing the full $80 million infrastructure contract next week. This could change everything for Morrison Technologies. $80 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. Amanda was celebrating an $8 million design contract, but the technology infrastructure deal that made her project possible was worth 10 times that amount. And my family had no idea that their unsuccessful daughter was managing a business relationship that dwarfed anything they'd ever achieved. I looked around the party one more time, taking in the celebration, the congratulations, the genuine joy on Amanda's face. She deserved to feel proud of her accomplishment, even if she didn't understand the full scope of how it had come together. But the disconnect between perception and reality was becoming unbearable. In a few hours, I'd need to make crucial decisions about the Grandview infrastructure deal that would impact not just Morrison Technologies, but also Amanda's design contract and potentially the entire trajectory of both our careers. The family that dismissed me as irrelevant was about to discover just how connected their worlds really were. As the formal presentations wound down, the party shifted into a more casual networking phase. Guests moved freely between the living room, dining room, and expansive outdoor patio, conducting business conversations over champagne and gourmet appetizers. The atmosphere felt electric with possibility and deal-making, exactly the kind of environment where Derek thrived. I remained near the kitchen observing the social dynamics while responding to increasingly urgent messages from James about the Grandview deal. The hotel executives needed final confirmation on several technical specifications, and there were questions about timeline coordination that required my immediate attention. But every time I started to step away to handle business calls, someone from my family intercepted me with demands for assistance. Frida Margaret appeared beside me with an armful of empty champagne flutes. "Could you help the catering staff with these glasses? They're falling behind, and we need to keep the drinks flowing for our important guests." It wasn't a request, it was a directive delivered in the tone of voice my mother used when she expected immediate compliance. I looked at the elegant crystal glasses, each one probably worth more than $100, and realized this was just the beginning of being conscripted into unpaid labor for the evening. "Of course," I replied quietly, taking the glasses and heading toward the kitchen. Maria and her team were indeed busy, but they were managing perfectly well without additional help. The real issue was that my family needed visible tasks to assign me ways to demonstrate my lower status to their prestigious guests. I'd barely finished helping with the glasses when Derek appeared with another assignment. "Frida, we need someone to manage the coat check situation," he announced, gesturing toward a growing pile of expensive outerwear in the front foyer. "Guests are just dropping their coats anywhere, and it's creating a mess. Could you organize that area and make sure everything stays secure?" The request was humiliating on multiple levels. First, it positioned me as hired help rather than family member. Second, it banished me from the main social areas where actual networking and conversation were taking place. Third, it implied that my time was less valuable than anyone else's at the party. But the most degrading aspect was Derek's tone of voice, which suggested he was doing me a favor by giving me something useful to do, as if my presence at my own sister's party was charity that needed to be earned through domestic service. I spent the next 45 minutes organizing designer coats, many of which cost more than most people's monthly rent. Armani jackets, Burberry trench coats, Canada Goose parkas, worth over $1,000 each. I carefully arranged everything on Amanda's custom closet system, making sure each item was properly hung and tagged for easy retrieval. During this time, several guests assumed I was professional coat check staff. A prominent real estate developer handed me a $5 tip when I helped him with his cashmere overcoat. A city council member's wife thanked me for the excellent service and asked if I worked for Elite Catering regularly. Each interaction reinforced my invisible status at the party. These were people who moved in the same social circles as my family, who knew my parents professionally, who'd probably heard stories about the successful Amanda and her disappointing sister. None of them recognized me as a family member because Derek and my parents had effectively erased me from the family narrative. My phone continued buzzing with urgent business messages, but I couldn't step away to handle them properly. The Grandview deal required my full attention, and I was getting increasingly frustrated with being trapped in a servant role while million-dollar decisions waited for my input. Robert approached the coat check area around 9:30, leading a group of potential clients for his accounting firm. I heard him explaining his business philosophy and methodology to people who seemed genuinely interested in his services. The key to successful financial management, he was saying, is understanding that every business decision has tax implications and cash flow consequences. My firm specializes in helping successful families and businesses optimize their financial strategies. One of his companions, a woman I recognized as the owner of several restaurant franchises, nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we need, someone who understands the complexities of managing multiple revenue streams. Robert beamed with professional pride. Exactly. Take my family, for example. My daughter Amanda just landed a major hotel design contract, and the tax planning alone requires sophisticated strategies for managing project income equipment, depreciation, and subcontractor relationships. The group was clearly impressed, and Robert continued building his credibility by discussing his family's business successes. My wife Margaret runs the most exclusive catering company in Denver. She handles events for Fortune 500 executives, major political fundraisers, high society weddings. The financial complexity of that business requires someone who understands luxury service markets. As he spoke, Robert's eyes passed over me, arranging coats. But there was no acknowledgement, no introduction, no mention of having another daughter. I'd been completely edited out of the family success story, reduced to invisible domestic help, while he leveraged Amanda's achievements to attract new clients. The conversation continued for several minutes with Robert weaving stories about Amanda's business acumen and Margaret's entrepreneurial spirit. He painted a picture of a family blessed with exceptional talent and drive, conveniently omitting any mention of the daughter who didn't fit the narrative. When the group finally moved on to rejoin the party, Robert passed right by me without a word, but I caught his whispered comment to his wife later as they discussed the evening's networking success. "This party is perfect for business development," he told Margaret near the bar. "Everyone's so impressed with Amanda's achievement, it reflects well on the whole family. Shows we know how to raise successful children." Margaret agreed enthusiastically. "It's wonderful having something positive to talk about. For so long, we've had to deflect questions about both girls. Now we can just focus on Amanda's accomplishments." The implication was crystal clear. I was the family embarrassment they'd previously had to deflect questions about. Amanda's success provided cover that allowed them to avoid discussing their other daughter's supposed failures. The relief in Margaret's voice was unmistakable. She was genuinely happy to have a family story that didn't require explaining away my existence. My phone rang insistently, showing James's name on the caller ID. I knew I needed to answer. This was the third call in 20 minutes, and Morrison Technologies couldn't afford delays on the Grandview project. But before I could step away to take the call, Derek appeared with his most demanding assignment yet. "Frida," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "we need you in the kitchen. The catering staff is overwhelmed with the dinner service, and Amanda specifically asked if you could help coordinate the appetizer distribution." The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. Amanda had never spoken to me all evening, let alone made any requests about catering coordination. Derek was manufacturing reasons to keep me busy with menial tasks, ensuring I remained visibly relegated to servant status throughout the party. But the worst part was his public delivery of the directive. By announcing my new assignment loudly, he was informing the surrounding guests that I was available for kitchen work, that my role at this family celebration was as unpaid labor. Several people turned to watch our interaction, probably wondering why a family member was being assigned domestic duties. I felt my cheeks burning with humiliation and anger, but I'd learned through painful experience that defending myself in these situations only made things worse. If I protested or tried to explain my actual circumstances, Derek would position me as difficult, ungrateful, or delusional about my importance. The family had perfected a system where resistance to mistreatment became proof of character flaws. "I'll be there in just a moment," I replied as calmly as possible, declining James's call and sending a quick text, "Family emergency. We'll call back in 30 minutes. His immediate response worried me. "Frida, this can't wait. Grandview executives are getting impatient. They need answers tonight, or they're considering alternative providers." Alternative providers. The phrase hit me like a slap. Morrison Technologies had invested months in developing custom solutions for the Grandview project. If they chose another company, we'd lose not just the $80 million deal, but also our positioning for future luxury hospitality contracts. Years of work and relationship building could evaporate because I couldn't escape my family's systematic humiliation long enough to handle business calls. I looked around the party, taking in the scene of celebration and networking. Amanda glowed with happiness and professional achievement. Derek worked the room like a master politician, building connections and closing deals. My parents basked in reflected glory, leveraging their daughter's success for their own business development. And I stood in the foyer organizing expensive coats, trapped between my family's refusal to acknowledge my worth and my company's urgent need for executive decision-making. The disconnect was becoming impossible to manage, but I couldn't see a way to resolve it without creating a scene that would damage relationships permanently. My phone buzzed with another message from James. "Hotel executives are talking about flying back to Seattle tomorrow morning. We need your approval tonight or this opportunity disappears." $80 million hanging in the balance while I folded cashmere scarves and arranged designer handbags. The irony was so bitter, I could taste it. My family's most successful daughter was celebrating an $8 million contract that existed because of my business connections, while they assigned me kitchen duty and prevented me from managing a deal worth 10 times that amount. But as I stood there feeling trapped and frustrated, I realized something important was about to change. The careful balance I'd maintained between my hidden success and my family's dismissive treatment was becoming unsustainable. Soon, very soon, these two worlds were going to collide in ways that would force everyone to confront the truth they'd spent years avoiding. The only question was whether I'd be ready when that moment arrived. At 10:15, just as I was helping Maria arrange the final appetizer platters for late evening service, the front doorbell chimed with the distinctive tone of Amanda's custom Westminster system. Through the kitchen serving window, I could see Derek hurrying to answer it, probably expecting another round of fashionably late guests, or perhaps a business contact he'd invited for private networking. But when the door opened, my heart nearly stopped. Standing on Amanda's marble front steps, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost $5,000, was James Harrison, my business partner, and the co-founder of Morrison Technologies. James looked exactly like what he was, a highly successful tech entrepreneur worth approximately $15 million, someone whose presence at any gathering immediately elevated its social significance. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture conveyed confidence earned through decades of building and selling companies, and his handshake had the firm authority of someone accustomed to closing major deals. What made the situation particularly complex was that James had no idea about my family dynamics. In our 3-year business partnership, I deliberately kept my personal life separate from our professional relationship. He knew I had family in Denver, but I'd never shared details about my parents' attitudes toward my career or Amanda's ignorance about my business success. From the kitchen, I watched Derek's demeanor transform instantly from casual host to aggressive networker. His eyes lit up with the recognition of unexpected opportunity, the chance to make a high-value connection he hadn't anticipated. "Welcome, welcome," Derek said with the enthusiasm he reserved for potential clients or important investors. "I'm Derek Chambers, Amanda's husband. Are you here for the celebration?" James smiled with practiced charm, but I could see the slight confusion in his expression. He was clearly trying to process why he'd been invited to a party without knowing the hosts personally. "Actually, I'm looking for Frida Morrison," James replied. "I believe she's here tonight. We have some urgent business matters to discuss." The impact of his words on Derek was visible from across the room. Derek's confident smile faltered slightly as he processed the implications. Someone this obviously successful and well-connected was looking for me specifically. This didn't align with the narrative Derek had constructed about my insignificance. "Frida." Derek repeated his tone, shifting to confusion. "She's here, yes, but she's helping with the catering. Are you sure you have the right person?" James's eyebrows lifted with surprise. "Frida Morrison, CEO of Morrison Technologies. This is definitely the right address. Is she available?" The word CEO hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb. Derek's face went through several expressions, in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally a forced smile that looked more like a grimace. Of course. Derek managed, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Let me find her for you. Please come in and join the party. Can I get you a drink?" As James entered the foyer, his presence immediately attracted attention from nearby guests. Several people recognized him or sensed his importance based on his bearing and expensive attire. Conversations paused as people tried to place him and figure out his connection to the evening's celebration. I remained frozen in the kitchen, watching through the serving window as my two worlds began to collide in real time. James was scanning the room, clearly looking for me, while Derek frantically tried to process how the family disappointment could be connected to someone of such obvious wealth and influence. Margaret appeared at Derek's side, having noticed the arrival of an important-looking stranger. Her hostess instincts kicked in immediately, and she extended her hand with her most gracious smile. "Welcome to our home," she said warmly. "I'm Margaret Morrison, Amanda's mother. Are you a friend of the family?" "Actually, I'm Frida's business partner," James replied, accepting her handshake while continuing to search the room. "James Harrison, Morrison Technologies. We have some pressing matters to discuss tonight." Margaret's face went through the same sequence of expressions Derek had displayed: confusion, shock, and forced composure. The idea that her supposedly unsuccessful daughter had a business partner, let alone one who looked like a Fortune 500 executive, clearly challenged everything she thought she knew about my life. "Business partner," Margaret repeated faintly. "I think there might be some confusion. Frida works in tech support." James smiled patiently the way he did when correcting misconceptions about our company. "No, she's the CEO of Morrison Technologies. We specialize in digital infrastructure for luxury hospitality properties. Quite successfully, I might add." The conversation was drawing more attention now. Amanda appeared drawn by the commotion, and several guests had paused their own conversations to listen. The elegant party atmosphere was shifting as people sensed something significant was happening. "I'm Amanda Chambers," my sister said, extending her hand with professional courtesy. "This is my celebration party. How do you know my sister?" "We've been business partners for 3 years, James explained. Morrison Technologies is one of the fastest growing firms in our sector. Frida's vision and leadership have been instrumental in our success." Amanda's expression revealed her complete bewilderment. The sister she'd spent years dismissing as a failure was being described as a visionary leader by someone who clearly operated at the highest levels of business. "There must be some mistake," Amanda said hesitantly. Frida doesn't run a company. She does phone support for some computer business. James looked genuinely puzzled now, glancing around the room as if trying to understand why everyone seemed confused about basic facts regarding his business partner. I'm sorry, but that's not accurate, he said firmly. Frida founded Morrison Technologies after leaving her position at Integrated Solutions. She's been CEO for 3 years, and we've built the company into a major player in luxury hospitality technology. We're currently managing contracts worth over $100 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. $100 million. Amanda's $8 million contract, which had been the centerpiece of the evening's celebration, suddenly seemed modest by comparison. Derek recovered first, his networking instincts overriding his confusion. Well, this is wonderful news, he said with forced enthusiasm. We had no idea Frida was involved in such significant business ventures. You must join us for drinks and celebration. But James was becoming increasingly concerned about the family's apparent ignorance regarding my professional life. I could see him processing the implications, wondering why my own family seemed shocked to learn about our company's success. Where is Frida? He asked more urgently. We really do need to discuss some time-sensitive matters. Derek gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. She's helping with the catering in the kitchen. Let me get her for you. Helping with catering. James's tone shifted to something approaching alarm. Why would the CEO of Morrison Technologies be doing catering work at a family party? The question hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Why indeed would a successful company executive be relegated to kitchen duty at her own sister's celebration? Margaret tried to smooth over the awkward moment. Oh, you know, family gatherings. Everyone pitches in to help make the evening special. But James wasn't buying the explanation. His business instincts were clearly telling him that something was seriously wrong with this picture. He'd worked with me for years and knew my capabilities, intelligence, and professional worth. The idea of me voluntarily accepting servant status at a family event didn't align with the confident executive he knew as his business partner. I think I'd like to speak with Frida directly, James said firmly. Could someone please get her? Derek nodded quickly, clearly eager to resolve the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Of course, Frida. Could you come here, please? His voice carried across the party, and conversations paused as people turned to see what was happening. I had no choice but to emerge from the kitchen, my simple black dress and slightly disheveled appearance contrasting sharply with James's elegant attire. As I approached the group, I could see James taking in the scene, my obvious discomfort, the family's shocked expressions, the way I'd been hidden away in service roles while they celebrated without acknowledging my presence. His eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine anger on my behalf. James was a sophisticated businessman who understood social dynamics and power structures. What he was witnessing clearly appalled him. Frida, he said warmly but with an edge of steel in his voice. I've been looking for you. We have that urgent Grandview matter to discuss. The word Grandview electrified the room. Amanda's face went pale as she realized that James was connected to her biggest client. The hotel chain that had just given her the contract of a lifetime was apparently doing business with her sister. But before anyone could ask questions, James continued, speaking his voice, carrying clearly across the now quiet room. The executives are waiting for final approval on the infrastructure deal. They want to accelerate the timeline and move forward with the full $80 million contract. $80 million. The number hung in the air like a revelation, dwarfing everything else that had happened that evening. While my family celebrated Amanda's success and assigned me kitchen duties, I was managing a business deal worth 10 times their biggest achievement. The room fell completely silent as the implications sank in. Every guest, every family member, every networking contact suddenly understood that the evening's power dynamics had been completely upside down. And I realized that the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for had finally arrived. The silence that followed James's announcement about the $80 million contract lasted only moments before the front doorbell chimed again, this time with an urgency that suggested important visitors. Derek, still reeling from the revelation about my business partnership, moved mechanically to answer the door, while the rest of the room remained frozen in shocked tableau. 3 impeccably dressed individuals stood on Amanda's front porch, each radiating the confident authority of senior executives, accustomed to luxury accommodations and high-stakes business decisions. The woman in the center, approximately 50 years old with silver-streaked hair pulled into an elegant chignon, wore a navy Armani suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her companions, both men in their 40s, flanked her with the practiced coordination of a seasoned executive team. "Good evening," the woman said with the polished voice of someone comfortable addressing boardrooms and investor meetings. "I'm Patricia Whitman, Senior Vice President of Development for Grandview Hotels. These are my colleagues, Michael Chen, Director of Operations, and David Rodriguez, Head of Strategic Planning. We're here for the Morrison Technologies meeting." Derek's face went through another series of rapid expressions as he processed this unexpected arrival. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic if it had been choreographed. Here were the actual executives from Amanda's biggest client arriving at the exact moment when my family was discovering my hidden business success. "Morrison Technologies," Derek repeated weakly, glancing back toward where James and I stood near the living room entrance. Patricia's professional smile remained steady, but her eyes showed slight confusion. "Yes, we have an urgent meeting scheduled with F. Morrison regarding the infrastructure coordination for our Pacific Northwest expansion. The design team leader requested accelerated timeline discussions." The phrase "design team leader" made Amanda straighten with sudden hope. Perhaps these executives were here to discuss additional aspects of her contract, maybe even expansions or upgraded requirements that could increase her project value. "That would be me," Amanda said, stepping forward with renewed confidence. "I'm Amanda Chambers, lead designer for the Grandview expansion project. How wonderful that you could join our celebration tonight." But Patricia's expression showed polite confusion rather than recognition. She exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding carefully. "I'm sorry, Ms. Chambers, but we're not familiar with your specific role in the project. Our primary coordination is with the technical infrastructure team. We work almost exclusively through F. Morrison's organization for operational planning and systems integration." The words hit Amanda like a physical blow. These were her clients, the people who'd hired her for the biggest contract of her career, and they didn't seem to know who she was beyond basic professional courtesy. Michael stepped forward to clarify, "The design elements are certainly important, but the technological infrastructure drives everything else. Guest experience, operational efficiency, revenue optimization, it all depends on the system's architecture that Morrison Technologies provides." David nodded agreement. Frankly, the interior design components are relatively straightforward compared to the complexity of integrating smart room controls, mobile connectivity platforms, and automated service systems across 6 properties simultaneously. Each word further diminished Amanda's role in the project while highlighting the importance of the technological framework I'd been developing. The contract she'd been celebrating as her career breakthrough was apparently a minor component of a much larger, more complex undertaking. Derek attempted to salvage the situation through aggressive networking. "Well, this is perfect timing," he announced with forced enthusiasm. "You can meet our whole family and see how we all contribute to business success in different ways." But Patricia was scanning the room with growing impatience. "We really need to speak with F. Morrison directly. We have final contract approvals that require immediate attention, and frankly, we're operating under very tight deadlines." James stepped forward smoothly, his executive presence commanding immediate attention from the hotel executives. "Patricia, good to see you again. Michael, David, thank you for making time tonight, despite the unusual venue." The hotel executive's demeanor shifted instantly upon recognizing James. their professional courtesy transformed into the respectful attention reserved for major business partners and decision-makers. "James," Patricia said with genuine warmth, "we appreciate your flexibility with the meeting location. The board is extremely eager to finalize these arrangements and move forward with implementation." Michael added, "The preliminary technical specifications you provided exceeded our expectations completely. The integration possibilities for guest experience enhancement are remarkable." David's enthusiasm was equally obvious. "Our operations team is particularly excited about the efficiency improvements your systems will provide. The cost savings alone justify the entire infrastructure investment." As this conversation unfolded, I watched my family's faces register growing bewilderment. These weren't just any business executives, these were the people behind Amanda's success story, and they clearly held James in the highest professional regard. But what happened next completely shattered any remaining illusions about the evening's power dynamics. "Where is F. Morrison tonight?" Patricia asked, looking around the room expectantly. "We specifically requested this meeting to address some timeline concerns and discuss the expanded implementation schedule." James smiled and gestured toward me. "Patricia, I'd like you to meet Frida Morrison, CEO and founder of Morrison Technologies." The hotel executives turned toward me with professional attention, and I saw the exact moment when they recognized my voice from countless phone conferences and video calls. "Ms. Morrison," Patricia said with obvious relief and respect, "it's wonderful to finally meet you in person. Your team's proposals have been absolutely exceptional, and we're ready to move forward with the full implementation package." The transformation in the room's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Suddenly, I wasn't the family disappointment hiding in the kitchen. I was the person these powerful executives had traveled across the city to meet. The most important people at Amanda's celebration party were here specifically to conduct business with me. Michael stepped forward eagerly. "The board approved the expanded timeline you proposed. We're prepared to accelerate the entire project schedule and begin implementation within 60 days. David's excitement was palpable. "The revenue projections based on your guest experience enhancements are extraordinary. Our shareholders are extremely pleased with the partnership potential." But amid all this professional recognition and business enthusiasm, I noticed something crucial that sent chills down my spine. The hotel executives kept referring to coordination with the design team and integration with interior planning, but they clearly had no meaningful relationship with Amanda beyond contractual formalities. Patricia confirmed my worst suspicions when she turned to Amanda with polite but distant courtesy. "Ms. Chambers, we appreciate your design work, of course, but I should mention that our primary concern is ensuring your team can adapt to the technical requirements that Morrison Technologies will be implementing." The implication was unmistakable. Amanda's design contract wasn't driving the project. It was dependent on my technology infrastructure. Without Morrison Technologies' systems architecture, her beautiful interior designs would be just pretty rooms, without the smart functionality that Grandview hotels actually wanted. Michael made the relationship even clearer. The guest experience features that justify our investment premium. The automated service systems, the operational efficiency improvements, those all come from Morrison Technologies platforms. Interior design needs to work around our technical specifications, not the other way around. Amanda's face had gone completely white as she realized her career-defining contract was actually a subordinate component of my much larger business relationship. The success she'd been celebrating, the achievement my family had been toasting, existed entirely at the discretion of Morrison Technologies' continued partnership with Grandview Hotels. But the final blow came when David addressed the room with casual authority. "We should mention the total infrastructure investment is quite substantial, over $80 million for the complete 6-property implementation. It's one of the largest technology integration projects in luxury hospitality this year." $80 million. The number hung in the air like a judgment, dwarfing Amanda's $8 million design contract and reducing it to exactly what it was: a small piece of a much larger puzzle that I controlled completely. The hotel executives continued their business discussion, oblivious to the family drama unfolding around them, but I could see the devastating realization spreading across my relatives' faces. Everything they'd celebrated tonight, everything they'd used to demonstrate Amanda's superiority over me, was built on a foundation I'd constructed and could withdraw at any moment. And they were finally beginning to understand just how precarious their success really was. The hotel executives excused themselves to take urgent calls from their corporate offices, leaving behind a room filled with stunned guests and family members who were struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. The carefully constructed narrative of Amanda's independent success was crumbling in real time, replaced by the uncomfortable reality that everything they'd celebrated was built on my hidden business achievements. But as the initial shock began to wear off, I started noticing details around the room that filled me with a different kind of horror. Margaret was showing a group of guests a display of framed photographs on the marble mantelpiece, proudly pointing out various family accomplishments and business milestones. "This is Amanda at the Hotel Design Excellence Awards," she was saying, indicating a professional photo of my sister accepting a crystal trophy. "And here's the grand opening of her first major commercial project, the Riverside Corporate Center." I moved closer to examine the photographs, feeling a growing sense of unease. The Riverside Corporate Center was a project I remembered clearly because Morrison Technologies had provided all the building automation systems, security infrastructure, and communications networks that made the space functional. Amanda had indeed handled interior design, but the project's success depended entirely on the technological framework my company had installed. The next photograph showed Amanda cutting a ribbon at what the caption described as the Metropolitan Office Complex Grand Opening. My heart sank as I recognized another Morrison Technologies project. We'd spent 8 months integrating smart building controls, energy management systems, and tenant connectivity platforms that transformed a standard office building into a premium commercial space. Margaret continued her guided tour with obvious pride. Amanda's firm specializes in creating intelligent commercial environments that combine aesthetic beauty with functional sophistication. She has such a talent for understanding how technology and design work together. But as I examined each photograph more carefully, I realized with growing dismay that I was looking at a systematic misrepresentation of my own professional work. Every project Margaret was showcasing as evidence of Amanda's business acumen was actually a collaboration where Morrison Technologies had provided the crucial infrastructure that made the designs viable. The Aurora Shopping Center renovation, where Amanda had done interior redesign, while my company installed the customer analytics systems, mobile payment platforms, and interactive directory networks that increased foot traffic by 40%. The downtown conference center expansion, where her aesthetic improvements were successful only because of the audio-visual system's wireless connectivity and automated meeting room controls that Morrison Technologies had engineered. Project after project, photograph after photograph, I was seeing my own work being credited to Amanda's design genius. Not through any deliberate fraud, but because my family had unconsciously erased my contributions from every story they told about our professional lives. James appeared beside me, studying the photograph display with increasing concern. As someone who'd worked closely with me for years, he recognized many of the projects and understood exactly what we were looking at. "Frida," he said quietly, "these are all Morrison Technologies installations. Why is your family presenting them as exclusively design achievements?" Before I could answer, Robert joined our conversation, clearly hoping to impress James with stories about our family's business successes. "Amanda has always had an extraordinary ability to envision how spaces can be transformed," he said proudly. "Take the Riverside project, for example. She convinced the developers to invest in cutting-edge technology integration that revolutionized the entire building's functionality." James's eyebrows lifted with surprise. "Actually, Robert, that was Frida's project. Morrison Technologies designed and installed all the building automation systems that made the space revolutionary. Amanda handled aesthetic elements, but the technological innovation came from your other daughter. Robert's confident smile faltered as he processed this information. Well, of course, the family works together on various projects. Amanda has always been good at coordinating different vendors and technical specialists. But James wasn't letting this misrepresentation slide. No, I think you misunderstand. Frida wasn't a vendor or specialist Amanda hired. Morrison Technologies was the primary contractor, and Amanda's design firm was a subcontractor we recommended to handle interior finishes. The reversal of roles hit Robert like a physical blow. In his mind, successful Amanda had been hiring technical support, including possibly her unsuccessful sister's small computer business. The reality that I'd been the primary contractor who'd hired Amanda as a subcontractor completely inverted everything he thought he understood. Margaret overheard James's correction and moved closer with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry, but there must be some misunderstanding. Amanda built her business by developing these major commercial projects. She's the one with the client relationships and project management experience." James looked at her with patient firmness. "Margaret, I've been Frida's business partner for 3 years. I've personally attended project meetings where your daughter Amanda was present as our interior design subcontractor. Frida managed the client relationships, the budgets, the technical specifications, and the overall project coordination. Amanda contributed valuable aesthetic expertise, but within the framework that Morrison Technologies established." Each word James spoke further demolished the family mythology that had positioned Amanda as the successful entrepreneur and me as the struggling failure. But as devastating as these revelations were, I was beginning to realize they represented only the surface of something much deeper and more painful. Derek appeared drawn by the increasingly tense conversation. "Look, I think there might be some confusion about who did what on various projects. The important thing is that Amanda's design work has been consistently excellent regardless of the technical details." But James was far from finished setting the record straight. "Derek, there's no confusion on my part. I have detailed contracts, project documentation, and client correspondence that clearly establish Morrison Technologies as the lead contractor on every project displayed in these photographs. Amanda's contributions were valuable, but they represented approximately 10 to 15% of the overall project value and complexity. 10 to 15%. The number struck the room like lightning. Amanda's celebrated business achievements, the foundation of my family's narrative about success and failure, represented a small fraction of projects where I'd been the primary architect of success. Derek's face had gone red with embarrassment and growing anger. "Well, Amanda never claimed to handle the technical aspects. Her expertise is in design and client relationship management." "Actually," James replied with devastating precision, "Frida managed all the primary client relationships. Amanda worked with interior design clients that we referred to her firm, but the major corporate clients, the project budgets, the strategic planning, that was all Morrison Technologies under Frida's leadership." I watched my family struggle with information that challenged everything they'd believed about our respective roles in the business world. For years, they'd celebrated Amanda's achievements while dismissing my work as insignificant. But James was methodically demonstrating that their successful daughter had actually been operating within the framework of my much larger business success. Margaret made one last attempt to preserve the familiar narrative. "Well, Amanda has certainly built strong relationships with her design clients. That's her particular strength." James nodded respectfully. "Absolutely, Amanda is talented at her work. But I think it's important for everyone to understand the actual scope and scale involved. Morrison Technologies generates approximately $12 to $15 million in annual revenue. Amanda's design firm, while successful within its niche, generates roughly $400,000 annually. The business relationships, project management, and strategic planning operate on completely different levels." The numbers hung in the air like a devastating verdict. $12 million versus $400,000. The successful daughter's entire business was roughly 3% the size of the failure daughter's company. But what made this revelation even more painful was realizing that my family had never asked about the scope or scale of my business. They'd simply assumed that any company I'd built must be small and struggling, while any success Amanda achieved must represent major entrepreneurial triumph. Robert attempted one final defense. Well, different businesses operate in different markets. Size isn't everything. You're absolutely right, James agreed. But I think context matters when we're discussing business success and family accomplishments. Frida has built one of the most respected technology consulting firms in the Western United States. We have Fortune 500 clients, municipal contracts, and strategic partnerships that most entrepreneurs would consider career-defining achievements. He paused, looking around the room at my family's stunned faces. What I don't understand is how none of you seem to know about any of this. The question hung in the air like an indictment, forcing everyone to confront the willful ignorance that had allowed them to maintain their comfortable misconceptions about my life and career. And I realized that the worst revelations were still to come. James's question about my family's ignorance of my business success hung in the air like an accusation, forcing everyone to confront years of deliberate misunderstanding. But as I watched their faces, memories began surfacing that revealed the depth of their systematic dismissal of every attempt I'd made to share my accomplishments with them. The first memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 years ago, when Morrison Technologies landed our first major municipal contract with the city of Denver for smart traffic management systems, I'd called Margaret to share the exciting news. I'd been so proud, so eager to tell someone in my family about this breakthrough moment that validated years of hard work and strategic planning. "Mom, you'll never guess what happened today," I'd said, my voice practically bubbling with enthusiasm. Morrison Technologies just won the contract to upgrade Denver's entire traffic control infrastructure. It's worth $3.2 million over 18 months. There had been a long pause before Margaret responded with the tone of voice she used when humoring children with overactive imaginations. "Frida, honey, that sounds wonderful, but you don't need to make up stories to impress me. I know you've been struggling since you left your last job, and it's perfectly fine to take time to find your direction." "I'm not making anything up," I'd protested. "I can send you the news article. The Denver Post covered the contract announcement." "Sweetie, stop," Margaret had said with that particular mixture of pity and exasperation that still made my chest tighten with remembered humiliation. "These fantasies about running some big company aren't helping you deal with reality. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend and we can talk about realistic career options?" She'd hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone while holding the actual signed contract that proved everything I'd told her was absolutely true. Another memory surfaced, equally painful. 6 months later, when Morrison Technologies had been featured in Colorado Business Magazine as one of the state's fastest-growing technology companies, I'd driven to my parents' house with a copy of the magazine, determined to show them physical proof of our success. Robert had flipped through the article with obvious skepticism, pointing to the company photograph that showed James and me standing in front of our downtown office building. "Frida, this is a nice picture, but anyone can get their photo in a magazine if they pay for advertising space. You can't expect us to believe you're actually running a multi-million-dollar company. We know what your apartment looks like. We know what car you drive. Successful business owners don't live like college students." What he didn't understand was that I'd deliberately chosen a modest lifestyle to avoid triggering the family jealousy and resentment I'd witnessed whenever anyone achieved unexpected success. I drove a reliable Honda and lived in a simple one-bedroom apartment because flashy displays of wealth had always caused problems in our family dynamic. "Dad, this isn't a paid advertisement," I'd explained patiently. "This is a legitimate business profile. The reporter interviewed our clients, verified our revenue figures, and spent 2 days at our office documenting our operations." Robert had handed the magazine back to me with a dismissive shake of his head. "Honey, I've been in business for 30 years. I know the difference between real success and marketing gimmicks. Maybe you're doing some small consulting work, and that's great, but you don't need to exaggerate the scope to make us proud of you. The conversation had ended with my parents encouraging me to apply for entry-level positions at established companies rather than wasting time on these startup fantasies. But the most devastating memory involved Amanda directly. 8 months ago, when Morrison Technologies celebrated our 3rd anniversary with a client appreciation event at the downtown Marriott, I'd invited my entire family, hoping they'd finally understand the scope and legitimacy of what I'd built. Amanda had agreed to attend, but called the morning of the event to cancel. "I'm sorry, Frida, but Derek and I just can't make it," she'd said with obvious discomfort. "We have a real networking event tonight with actual business leaders, and we can't afford to miss those opportunities for something that's more like a hobby celebration." "Amanda, this isn't a hobby," I'd said, feeling my heart breaking with disappointment. "We're expecting over 200 clients and industry partners. The mayor is giving a speech about innovation in Denver business. Look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but we both know this computer stuff isn't a real business. Maybe you're making a little money on the side, and that's wonderful, but Derek and I need to focus on legitimate professional opportunities." She'd hung up, leaving me to attend my own company's major celebration alone, without a single family member present, to witness what should have been one of the proudest moments of my career. Now standing in Amanda's living room while James systematically revealed the true scope of Morrison Technologies to my family, I realized that every dismissal, every refusal to acknowledge my success, every insistence that I was delusional about my achievements had been a deliberate choice to preserve their comfortable narrative about family roles and relationships. Derek interrupted my painful trip down memory lane by attempting to redirect the conversation toward safer territory. "Well, this is all very interesting," he said with forced casualness, "but the important thing tonight is celebrating Amanda's achievement with the Grandview Hotel's contract. That's a concrete verified success that we can all be proud of." But James wasn't allowing any escape from the uncomfortable truths that were finally being acknowledged. "Actually, Derek, I think you should understand something important about that contract," James said with the patient tone he used when correcting fundamental misunderstandings. "Amanda's design work for Grandview Hotels exists entirely within the framework of Morrison Technologies' infrastructure project. Without our systems integration, there would be no Grandview expansion and therefore no design contract." The room went quiet as people processed the implications. Amanda's crowning achievement, the contract that had justified tonight's celebration and reinforced the family's belief in her superior business acumen, was completely dependent on my company's much larger project. Margaret made a desperate attempt to minimize the significance of James's revelation. "Well, all business relationships involve cooperation and mutual support. The important thing is that both girls are contributing to successful projects." But James was far from finished explaining the actual dynamics involved. "Margaret, I think you're missing the crucial point. Morrison Technologies recommended Amanda's firm to Grandview Hotels as a qualified subcontractor for interior design elements. Frida specifically suggested her sister when the hotels asked for design firm referrals. Amanda didn't win this contract through independent networking or business development. She received it because Frida arranged the introduction." The words hit the room like a bomb. Amanda's greatest professional achievement, the triumph my family had been celebrating all evening, had been a gift from the sister they'd spent years dismissing as a failure. Amanda's face had gone completely white as she stared at me with dawning comprehension. "You recommended my firm to Grandview." I nodded quietly, feeling simultaneously vindicated and heartbroken by the necessity of this revelation. James continued relentlessly. "Frida specifically told the hotel executives that her sister ran an excellent design firm that would be perfect for their aesthetic requirements. Without that introduction and recommendation, Amanda's firm would never have been considered for the project." Derek looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "You're saying Frida arranged Amanda's biggest contract?" "Exactly," James confirmed. And not only that, but the contract's ongoing viability depends completely on Morrison Technologies' continued partnership with Grandview Hotels. If our infrastructure project were to be canceled or delayed, Amanda's design contract would be terminated immediately. The power dynamic that had governed this family for years was inverting before everyone's eyes. The successful daughter's achievements were revealed as gifts from the unsuccessful daughter. The family failure was exposed as the hidden architect of the family success story. But I could see from their expressions that they were finally beginning to understand just how thoroughly they'd misjudged everything about my life and career. And I realized we were approaching the moment when all these revelations would have very real, very immediate consequences for everyone in the room. The hotel executives returned from their phone calls with expressions of urgency that immediately commanded the room's attention. Patricia's earlier professional courtesy had been replaced by the focused intensity of someone dealing with corporate crisis management, while Michael and David flanked her with the grim determination of executives facing potential disaster. "I'm afraid we have some pressing concerns," Patricia announced without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news to business partners and stakeholders. "Our board of directors has been reviewing the Grandview expansion timeline, and they're expressing serious reservations about coordination between different project components." Amanda stepped forward eagerly, clearly hoping this was an opportunity to demonstrate her value to the project and salvage her professional standing after the evening's revelations about my hidden involvement in her success. "Whatever coordination issues exist, I'm confident we can resolve them quickly," she said with forced brightness. "My team is extremely flexible and experienced with complex multi-vendor project management." But Patricia's response revealed that the problems went far deeper than simple coordination challenges. "Ms. Chambers, I appreciate your willingness to help, but the concerns are specifically about technological integration timeline," Patricia explained with careful diplomacy. "The board is questioning whether the interior design timeline can accommodate the extensive infrastructure installation that Morrison Technologies needs to complete." Michael stepped forward to clarify the technical implications. The smart room system's automated building controls and integrated guest experience platforms require substantial pre-construction work. Electrical systems, data network installation, server room preparation. These elements need to be completed before any cosmetic design work can begin. David added his own sobering perspective. "Our operations team has been reviewing the project schedule, and they're concerned that design delays could push back our grand opening dates by 6 to 8 months. That would represent millions in lost revenue and compromise our competitive positioning in key markets." The implications of their concerns were becoming crystal clear. Amanda's design contract wasn't just dependent on my technology infrastructure, it was actually subordinate to it in the project timeline. If Morrison Technologies encountered any delays or complications, Amanda's work couldn't even begin. Derek jumped into the conversation with the aggressive confidence he used when sensing potential business opportunities. "Surely these timeline issues can be resolved through better communication and project coordination," he said assertively. "Amanda's firm has extensive experience managing complex renovation schedules, and we're confident we can accommodate whatever technical requirements are necessary." But Patricia's response showed that Derek fundamentally misunderstood the scope of what they were dealing with. "Mr. Chambers, I don't think you appreciate the scale of technological integration involved in this project," she said with barely concealed impatience. "We're not talking about installing some computers and upgrading Wi-Fi connections. Morrison Technologies is implementing comprehensive smart building infrastructure that will control everything from HVAC systems and lighting to security protocols and guest service automation." Michael elaborated with technical precision that made clear just how little Amanda's role mattered in the larger project scope. Each guest room will feature 23 integrated sensors, automated environmental controls, personalized entertainment systems, and mobile connectivity platforms that interface with hotel operations in real time. The networking infrastructure alone requires 18 months of planning and installation. David delivered the final blow to Amanda's perceived importance in the project. Interior design elements like furniture selection and color schemes can be completed in the final 3 months before opening. The technological infrastructure determines whether we have functional hotels or expensive empty buildings. Amanda's face showed growing panic as she realized that her $8 million contract could be completed in 3 months, while my $80 million infrastructure deal required 18 months of complex technical work. Her celebrated achievement was beginning to look like a minor finishing touch on something far more substantial. But the hotel executives weren't finished delivering bad news. The board has requested immediate clarification on several technical specifications. Patricia announced turning her attention toward me for the first time since returning from their phone calls. Ms. Morrison, they need final approval on the data center, specifications, confirmation of the mobile app integration timeline, and verification of the guest analytics platform capabilities. I felt every eye in the room focus on me as Patricia continued outlining urgent business decisions that required my immediate attention. Furthermore, our investors are particularly interested in the revenue optimization projections that Morrison Technologies proposed. The predictive analytics systems, dynamic pricing integration, and guest behavior tracking platforms represent significant competitive advantages that justify our infrastructure investment. James stepped forward to provide additional context that made clear why these issues couldn't wait for a more convenient time. The hotel industry operates on extremely tight development timelines, he explained to the room. Seasonal booking patterns, construction scheduling, and competitive market positioning mean that delays measured in weeks can cost millions in revenue and market opportunity. Michael nodded grimly. Our competitors are launching similar luxury properties in Seattle and Portland next year. If our grand opening dates slip by even 3 months, we lose first-mover advantage in markets worth hundreds of millions annually. David added the financial perspective that made the stakes absolutely clear. The board approved this expansion based on Morrison Technologies' projections for guest experience enhancement and operational efficiency improvements. If those technological capabilities aren't delivered on schedule, the entire project becomes financially unviable. Amanda made a desperate attempt to insert herself into this high-stakes business discussion. I understand the importance of coordination, she said with barely controlled panic. My firm is completely flexible on timeline and willing to adjust our schedule to accommodate any technical requirements. But Patricia's response showed that Amanda's willingness to accommodate was irrelevant to the larger concerns driving this conversation. Ms. Chambers, with respect, interior design scheduling is not our primary concern right now. We need to know whether Morrison Technologies can deliver the technological infrastructure that makes this project worth pursuing at all. The brutal dismissal of Amanda's importance in the project was devastating to witness. The sister who'd been celebrated all evening as the family's business success story was being politely but firmly told that her contributions were peripheral to what really mattered. But the most alarming development came when Patricia turned back to me with obvious frustration. Ms. Morrison, we've been waiting for your responses to our technical queries for over 2 hours. The board is in emergency session right now, and they need immediate confirmation that Morrison Technologies remains fully committed to the accelerated timeline they've requested. I realized with growing alarm that while my family had been processing revelations about my hidden business success, crucial corporate decisions had been hanging in the balance. The $80 million contract that represented Morrison Technologies' biggest breakthrough was at risk because I'd been trapped in family dynamics rather than handling executive responsibilities. James's expression showed that he understood the gravity of our situation completely. "Frida, the board wants answers tonight," he said urgently. "If we can't provide confirmation within the next 30 minutes, they're prepared to consider alternative technology providers." Alternative providers. The word sent chills down my spine. Years of relationship building, months of custom system design, and the biggest contract in Morrison Technologies' history were all hanging in the balance. But before I could respond to the business crisis unfolding around me, Derek made one final desperate attempt to position himself advantageously in what he still didn't understand was a conversation that could destroy Amanda's contract entirely. "Look," he said with misplaced confidence, "I think we're overcomplicating this situation. Amanda and Morrison Technologies can obviously work together to resolve any timeline issues. We're all family here after all." The comment revealed how completely Derek misunderstood the business dynamics involved. This wasn't a family coordination problem that could be solved through goodwill and compromise. This was a corporate crisis that would determine whether Amanda had any contract at all. And as Patricia's increasingly impatient expression made clear my family was about to discover just how quickly professional success could evaporate when the underlying business relationships shifted, Derek's mention of family cooperation seemed to trigger something in Patricia's executive mindset, and her expression shifted from impatience to active alarm. She exchanged rapid glances with Michael and David before addressing the room with the kind of urgent authority that suggested major corporate decisions were being made in real time. "Actually, there's another issue we need to address immediately," she announced, pulling out her phone and rapidly scrolling through what appeared to be urgent messages. "Our board has been trying to reach F. Morrison directly for the past hour to discuss accelerated implementation deadlines. All our calls are going to voicemail, and we're getting automated responses to urgent emails." I felt my stomach drop as I realized what was happening. In my effort to maintain privacy at Amanda's party, I'd silenced my phone and activated out-of-office email responses that directed inquiries to James. But the hotel executives didn't understand this arrangement and were interpreting my unavailability as a sign of potential problems with Morrison Technologies' commitment to their project. Michael stepped forward with obvious concern. "The board specifically requested communication with F. Morrison tonight because they want personal assurance from the company founder about meeting the accelerated timeline. Without direct confirmation, they're questioning whether Morrison Technologies has the executive bandwidth to handle a project of this magnitude." David added the devastating corporate context. When Fortune 500 companies can't reach the CEO of a strategic partner during crisis discussions, they typically interpret that as evidence of operational instability or lack of commitment to the partnership. Derek's face lit up with sudden understanding, but it was the wrong kind of understanding entirely. In his networking-obsessed mind, he just identified the most important person in the room, someone even more influential than James Harrison. "F. Morrison," Derek repeated with growing excitement. "So this person is even more senior than James, the actual decision-maker for an $80 million contract." Patricia nodded impatiently. F. Morrison founded Morrison Technologies and maintains direct relationships with all major client executives. Our board specifically requested tonight's meeting because they want to accelerate the entire project timeline and expand the scope to include additional properties. Margaret moved closer to the conversation with the predatory instincts of someone sensing a major networking opportunity. "How wonderful that such an important business leader wants to meet with our family," she said, with barely contained excitement. "We should definitely help you contact this Morrison person immediately." Robert joined the growing cluster of people eager to facilitate access to someone they now understood was worth $80 million in business relationships. "Absolutely," he agreed enthusiastically. "Whatever we can do to support this meeting. Do you have contact information we could help verify?" Derek took charge of the situation with the aggressive efficiency he used when pursuing high-value business connections. "Let me get my laptop and see what we can find," he announced, already moving toward his home office. "Between LinkedIn corporate directories and business databases, we should be able to track down direct contact information." James shot me a look that mixed amusement with growing alarm. He clearly understood that my family was desperately trying to help the hotel executives contact me, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right in front of them. But what made the situation even more surreal was watching Amanda join the frantic effort to locate the mysterious F. Morrison, who apparently controlled her professional destiny. Let me call my assistant, Amanda said, pulling out her phone with obvious panic. She has connections throughout the design and tech industries. If anyone can track down contact information quickly, she can. Patricia's frustration was becoming increasingly visible as she watched a room full of people volunteering to help find someone who was actually present at the party. We really need to speak with F. Morrison tonight, she emphasized. The board is meeting with our investors tomorrow morning, and they need confirmation that the technology partnership is solid and ready for expansion. Derek returned with his laptop, setting it up on Amanda's marble coffee table and immediately beginning an intensive online search for information about Morrison Technologies' elusive founder. "Here we go," he announced triumphantly, reading from the company's corporate website. Morrison Technologies, founded 3 years ago by F. Morrison, specializing in luxury hospitality infrastructure. Wow, look at this client list. 4 Seasons Ritz-Carlton St. Regis, Mandarin Oriental. Margaret peered over Derek's shoulder at the laptop screen, her eyes widening as she took in the scope of Morrison Technologies' business relationships. "This F. Morrison person works with all the most exclusive hotels in the country," she said with obvious awe. "No wonder the Grandview executives are so eager to speak with them directly." Robert studied the financial information Derek had pulled up from business databases. According to Dun & Bradstreet, Morrison Technologies has annual revenues of approximately $15 million. He reported with the reverence he reserved for discussing truly successful businesses. This F. Morrison built a major enterprise from scratch in just 3 years. Amanda was conducting her own parallel search on her phone, reading aloud from industry articles and business profiles. Here's a piece from Colorado Business Journal calling F. Morrison one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in hospitality technology, she announced. And look, Forbes included Morrison Technologies in their list of fastest-growing companies in the Mountain West. Each discovery made my family more desperate to facilitate a connection with someone they now realized was not just successful, but extraordinarily influential in exactly the industries where they wanted to build their own business relationships. Derek found Morrison Technologies' corporate address and phone number, immediately dialing while putting the call on speaker so everyone could hear. "Morrison Technologies, thank you for calling," came my assistant Sarah's recorded voice. "Our offices are currently closed, but if this is an urgent matter regarding existing projects, please contact James Harrison at extension 207. Derek hung up and tried James's extension, which predictably went to voicemail since James was standing right next to me in Amanda's living room. "This is frustrating," Derek muttered, trying several more numbers listed on the corporate website. "For such a successful company, they're remarkably difficult to reach." Patricia checked her watch with obvious impatience. "Our board meeting starts in 45 minutes. If we can't establish contact with F. Morrison tonight, they're prepared to activate backup plans with alternative technology providers." The phrase alternative providers sent panic through everyone who understood what that meant for Amanda's contract. Without Morrison Technologies' infrastructure project, there would be no Grandview expansion and therefore no design contract for Amanda to celebrate. Margaret took charge of the search with the determination of someone whose daughter's career was hanging in the balance. "Everyone use your phones to search for personal contact information," she commanded. "LinkedIn, Facebook business directories, alumni networks, anything that might lead to direct contact with F. Morrison." The room erupted into frantic activity as a dozen people began conducting intensive online searches for the person who could save Amanda's biggest career achievement. Derek worked through LinkedIn connections Robert called business associates who might have industry contacts, and Amanda reached out to every professional contact she could think of. But the most ironic element of this desperate search was watching my own family work harder to find me than they'd ever worked to understand or acknowledge my actual presence in their lives. James moved closer to me, speaking quietly enough that only I could hear. "This is getting ridiculous, Frida. Should I just tell them who you are and end this circus?" I shook my head, watching my family's frantic efforts with a mixture of fascination and growing anger. For years, they'd dismissed everything I'd tried to tell them about my business success. Now they were desperately trying to contact the same person they'd been systematically ignoring and belittling. But as I watched them search for F. Morrison with such obvious desperation, I realized something important was about to change forever. In a few minutes, they would discover that the person they were frantically trying to impress, the business leader they considered so important that Amanda's career depended on reaching them, was the same daughter they'd been treating as hired help all evening. And when that moment came, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The frantic search for F. Morrison had been continuing for 20 minutes when Margaret made a discovery that sent the family's desperation into overdrive. She'd been scrolling through business networking sites on her phone when she found a Forbes article from 6 months ago that detailed Morrison Technologies' expansion plans and projected growth. "Listen to this," she announced, breathlessly reading aloud to the room. Morrison Technologies founder F. Morrison Projects company revenues will exceed $25 million within 18 months, driven by exclusive partnerships with luxury hospitality brands and Fortune 500 corporate clients. Derek stopped typing on his laptop and looked up with the expression of someone who just realized they were dealing with business royalty. $25 million in 18 months, he repeated slowly. That's not just successful, that's empire-building level success. Robert whistled low as he processed the implications. For comparison, my accounting firm generates about $3 million annually after 20 years in business. This F. Morrison person is operating on a completely different scale. Amanda had gone pale as she realized that her professional future depended entirely on someone whose business achievements dwarfed anything her own family had ever accomplished. "We have to find a way to reach this person," she said with barely controlled panic. "My entire contract depends on Morrison Technologies staying committed to the Grandview project." Patricia checked her watch again, her impatience turning to genuine alarm. "I need to be completely honest with everyone. Our board is not just considering alternative technology providers. They're actively negotiating with 2 backup companies right now. If F. Morrison doesn't confirm commitment to the accelerated timeline within the next 20 minutes, our backup contracts become primary agreements." The revelation that alternative providers were already being negotiated sent shockwaves through the room. Amanda's $8 million contract wasn't just at risk, it was hanging by a thread that could snap at any moment. Derek immediately shifted into crisis management mode, the same aggressive problem-solving approach he used when major deals were threatening to collapse. "Okay, everyone, we need to think strategically about this," he announced, taking charge of the room with the authority of someone accustomed to high-pressure business situations. "What assets do we have that might help us reach F. Morrison?" Margaret stepped forward eagerly. "I've been thinking about this. We know Morrison Technologies works with luxury hotels and high-end corporate clients. My catering company serves many of those same markets. I might have connections who've worked with their team." Robert nodded enthusiastically. "And my accounting firm handles several technology companies. Maybe some of our clients have had business relationships with Morrison Technologies." But Derek's next suggestion revealed just how desperately the family was willing to exploit any available resource. "What about Frida?" he said, turning toward me with sudden interest. "She works in tech support, right? Even if it's a different company, she might have industry contacts who know how to reach Morrison Technologies executives." The irony of Derek's suggestion was so profound it left me momentarily speechless. He was essentially asking me to help him find myself completely oblivious to the fact that the person he was desperately trying to reach was standing directly in front of him. Margaret's eyes lit up with sudden hope. "That's brilliant, Derek. Frida might be our best chance at making the right connections." Amanda turned toward me with an expression that mixed desperate hope with barely concealed condescension. "Frida, this is really important," she said with the tone of voice she used when explaining complex concepts to children. "Could you use your computer skills to help us track down contact information for F. Morrison? Maybe there are technical databases or industry directories that only people in your field know about." Robert joined the chorus of family members, suddenly very interested in my potential usefulness. Frida, we know you've had some challenges building your own career, but this could be a chance for you to help Amanda with something really significant, he said with the patronizing encouragement he used when trying to motivate underperforming employees. Sometimes helping successful family members is how we find our own path to contribution. Derek took the exploitation even further, essentially offering to trade my services for access to the powerful executive they needed to impress. Here's what I'm thinking, he announced with the strategic confidence he used when structuring complex business deals. Frida, if you can help us make contact with F. Morrison tonight, I'll personally introduce you to 3 major technology companies that might have entry-level positions available. This could be your chance to finally get your career on track. The condescending nature of Derek's offer was breathtaking. He was essentially proposing to reward my help in finding myself by offering me the kind of job opportunities that entry-level tech workers might value. The CEO of a $15 million company was being offered entry-level job referrals as payment for helping her family reach the CEO of her own company. Margaret elaborated on Derek's proposal with obvious excitement. And I could introduce you to some of my catering clients who might need administrative assistance or event coordination help. This could be exactly what you need to get your professional life moving in the right direction. Amanda added her own incentive to the growing pile of rewards being offered for my cooperation. If you help us solve this crisis, I'll ask my design clients if they need any support staff for filing phone answering or basic office tasks, she said with the generous tone of someone offering charity to a desperate relative. I know you've been looking for stable employment. The family was essentially auctioning off their connections and resources, offering me scraps from their professional tables in exchange for helping them reach the most important business contact any of them had ever needed to impress. But Robert's contribution to this patronizing negotiation revealed the depth of their misunderstanding about my actual circumstances. Frida, I want to be direct with you about something, he said with the serious tone he used when discussing financial realities with struggling clients. I know you've been having trouble making ends meet living in that small apartment downtown driving that old Honda. This could be your chance to earn some real money. He paused dramatically, clearly preparing to make what he considered a generous offer. If you can help us contact F. Morrison and save Amanda's contract, I'll pay you $5,000 out of my own pocket. That's more money than you've probably seen at one time in years. $5,000. The amount was so absurdly small compared to my actual financial position that I almost laughed out loud. Robert was offering to pay me roughly what Morrison Technologies generated in revenue every 3 hours, as if it represented life-changing money for someone he assumed was barely surviving financially. Derek built on Robert's offer with additional financial incentives. And if F. Morrison agrees to maintain the Grandview partnership, I'll add another $3,000 to that payment, he announced magnanimously. $8,000 total for helping your family during a crisis. Margaret couldn't resist adding her own contribution to the growing pot of rewards being offered for my assistance. Plus, I'll cater your next birthday party completely free, she said with obvious pride in her generosity. That's easily worth $1,500 in premium catering services. Amanda topped off the family's collective bribery attempt with her own version of valuable compensation. And I'll design a complete makeover for your apartment at no charge, she added enthusiastically. Professional interior design consultation, furniture selection, color coordination, everything you need to create a space that reflects success and sophistication. The family had essentially created a reward package worth approximately $10,000 in cash and services, offering it to me as payment for helping them contact the person who controlled their professional destinies, completely unaware that they were bribing me with pocket change to introduce them to myself. James moved closer to me, speaking quietly enough that only I could hear his words. This is getting insane, Frida. They're essentially offering to pay you to save them from their own ignorance. But before I could respond, Derek made one final appeal that revealed the true depths of their desperation. "Frida, I'm going to be completely honest with you," he said with the earnest sincerity he used when making his most important sales pitches. "If we don't reach F. Morrison in the next 15 minutes, Amanda loses the biggest contract of her career and our entire family's business reputation suffers permanent damage." He gestured around the room at the hotel executives, the influential party guests, and the networking contacts he'd spent all evening trying to impress. "Everyone here tonight will remember that we couldn't deliver when it mattered most. That kind of failure follows families for years, affecting every business relationship and professional opportunity." Derek's voice took on a pleading quality that I'd never heard before. "This is your chance to be the family hero, Frida, to finally contribute something meaningful to our success. Don't let your own frustrations with your career situation prevent you from helping when we really need you." The emotional manipulation was expertly crafted, positioning my potential refusal to help as selfishness that would damage the entire family's prospects. Derek was essentially arguing that my duty as a family member required me to save them from a crisis they didn't even understand. But as I looked around the room at their desperate faces, their offers of money and favors, their promises of career assistance and professional connections, I realized something important had fundamentally changed in our family dynamic. For the first time in my adult life, they needed me more than I needed them, and they had no idea how completely the power balance had shifted. Patricia's voice cut through the family's desperate negotiations with corporate authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to inform you that our board meeting starts in 10 minutes. If we haven't established contact with F. Morrison by then, Grandview Hotels will be activating our alternative technology partnerships immediately." The countdown had begun, and my family's frantic efforts to contact me were about to collide with a reality that would change everything forever. Patricia's 10-minute deadline created an atmosphere of barely controlled panic in Amanda's living room. The elegant party that had begun as a celebration of family success was rapidly transforming into a crisis management situation where millions of dollars in business relationships hung in the balance. Derek abandoned all pretense of casual networking and moved into full crisis mode, barking orders at family members like a military commander, coordinating an emergency response. "Margaret, call every caterer in Denver who works luxury events," he commanded while simultaneously typing furiously on his laptop. "Ask if any of them have worked Morrison Technologies' corporate functions. Robert, contact every tech company client you have," he continued without pausing. "Someone has to know someone who's dealt with Morrison Technologies. Amanda, get on the phone with every design contact you have in the hospitality industry. Call hotel managers, event coordinators, anyone who might have inside information about their vendor relationships." The room erupted into frantic activity as family members began making rapid-fire phone calls, each conversation becoming more desperate as they encountered dead ends and unavailable contacts. The wealthy party guests stood around awkwardly, unsure whether to leave or stay, for what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable family crisis. I watched this frenzy of activity while standing near the kitchen entrance, still holding my phone, with increasingly urgent messages from James about the Grandview deal. The disconnect between my family's frantic search for me and their continued dismissal of my actual presence was becoming surreal. Derek's laptop search had evolved into a comprehensive investigation of Morrison Technologies' corporate structure, client relationships, and industry connections. He was reading aloud from business articles and corporate filings, painting a picture of success that made my family increasingly desperate to establish contact. According to this analysis from Colorado Business Report, F. Morrison has built one of the most influential technology consulting firms in the Mountain West, Derek announced to the room. They have exclusive partnerships with hotel chains, Fortune 500 corporations, and municipal governments. Margaret paused in her phone calls to listen as Derek continued reading from his research. Morrison Technologies' client retention rate is 97%, which is extraordinary in the consulting industry. Their average contract value is over $2 million, and they consistently rank in the top 5 technology firms for client satisfaction. Robert looked up from his own phone calls with obvious awe. $2 million average contracts? That's larger than most companies' annual revenue. Amanda had been listening to Derek's research while conducting her own desperate networking efforts, but she suddenly stopped mid-conversation and turned toward our group with a look of growing panic. "I just talked to the event coordinator at the downtown Marriott," she announced with obvious distress. "She said Morrison Technologies held their anniversary celebration there 8 months ago, and it was one of the most impressive corporate events she'd ever managed." Derek immediately focused on this potential lead. Did she have any contact information, any way to reach their executives directly? "That's the problem," Amanda replied with increasing anxiety. She said the event was planned entirely through F. Morrison's personal assistant, and they maintained complete confidentiality about contact information. Even the hotel management wasn't given direct access to executives. Margaret joined the conversation with her own disturbing discovery. "I just called Elite Events, the premier corporate event planning company in Denver. They said Morrison Technologies is known throughout the industry for being extremely selective about their partnerships and maintaining very tight control over their business relationships." Robert added another layer of concerning information from his own industry contacts. "My friend who handles corporate accounts at First National Bank says Morrison Technologies is one of their most valuable clients, but F. Morrison personally manages all banking relationships and never delegates financial decision-making to subordinates." Each piece of information made Morrison Technologies seem more exclusive, more successful, and more impossible to reach through normal networking channels. The picture emerging from their research was of a company that operated at such a high level that regular business contacts couldn't provide access to their leadership. Derek's frustration was becoming increasingly visible as potential leads evaporated one by one. "This is insane," he muttered, staring at his laptop screen filled with Morrison Technologies information. "How can someone who controls $80 million in business relationships be this difficult to contact?" James moved closer to me, speaking quietly while the family continued their frantic search efforts. "Frida, this is getting ridiculous. The hotel executives are getting ready to leave, your family is having nervous breakdowns, and we still have major business decisions hanging in the balance." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. But before I could respond, Patricia approached our group with the grim expression of someone about to deliver an ultimatum. "I'm sorry to interrupt your search efforts," she said with professional courtesy that barely concealed her frustration, "but I need to update you on our corporate situation." The room fell quiet as everyone turned to listen to what they suspected would be devastating news. Our board has been in contact with Alternative Digital Solutions, one of Morrison Technologies' primary competitors in the luxury hospitality sector. Patricia announced with the measured tone of someone delivering a corporate death sentence. Amanda's face went white as she realized the implications. "They've agreed to take over the entire Grandview infrastructure project at a 15% discount compared to Morrison Technologies' proposal." Patricia continued relentlessly. "Their executives are available for immediate consultation, and they can begin implementation within 30 days. Derek jumped up from his laptop with desperate urgency. But surely Morrison Technologies' superior experience and established relationship with Grandview makes them the better choice even if they're slightly more expensive. Patricia's response revealed the brutal realities of corporate decision-making when communication breaks down. Mr. Chambers in business availability and responsiveness often matter more than marginal quality differences. When a CEO becomes unreachable during critical timeline discussions, it suggests potential problems with company leadership and project management capabilities. Michael stepped forward to provide additional context that made the situation even more dire. Alternative Digital Solutions has a founder who's personally available 24 hours a day for major client consultations. Their CEO answered our call on the first ring and immediately offered to fly to Denver tonight for emergency project discussions. David added the final element that made clear just how precarious Morrison Technologies' position had become. The responsiveness contrast is significant from a board perspective. One company's leadership is completely available when we need immediate decisions, while the other company's founder has been unreachable for over 3 hours during a business crisis. Amanda looked like she was about to vomit as she realized that her design contract was about to disappear because of communication problems she couldn't understand or control. "Please," she said with barely controlled desperation, "there must be some way to reach F. Morrison before you make this decision final." But Derek's next actions revealed just how little he understood about appropriate professional behavior during crisis situations. "Frida," he suddenly shouted across the room with a tone of voice that made every guest and family member stop their conversations. "Get over here right now. We need you to stop wasting time and focus on helping us solve this problem." The volume and hostility of Derek's command created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Several wealthy guests exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing inappropriate family dynamics that made them question the professionalism of everyone involved. "I don't care what you're doing in that kitchen," Derek continued loudly. "This family crisis is more important than whatever domestic tasks you think you need to handle." Margaret joined Derek's aggressive approach with her own public scolding. "Frida, this is not the time for your usual distracted behavior," she announced in a voice that carried across the entire party. "Your sister's career is hanging in the balance, and we need you to use whatever computer skills you have to help solve this crisis." Robert added his own version of public pressure, apparently believing that humiliating me in front of the hotel executives would somehow motivate better performance. "Young lady, I'm disappointed in your attitude tonight," he said with the authoritative tone he used when lecturing underperforming employees. "When family members need help, you don't get to prioritize your personal comfort over collective success." The public nature of their scolding was creating obvious discomfort among the party guests who were witnessing what appeared to be parents and relatives treating an adult family member like an irresponsible child who needed public correction. James moved closer to me, his expression showing genuine anger at the way my family was treating me in front of business associates and influential guests. "This is completely unacceptable," he said quietly but with steel in his voice. "They're publicly humiliating you at a time when you're managing one of the most important business decisions in our company's history." But Derek wasn't finished with his public criticism of my supposed lack of cooperation. "Everyone can see that Frida isn't taking this situation seriously," he announced to the room, including the hotel executives in his commentary. "This is exactly the kind of attitude that's prevented her from achieving success in her own life." The comment was designed to position me as the family problem, the unreliable relative whose selfishness was threatening everyone else's legitimate business success. Derek was essentially telling a room full of influential business people that I was personally responsible for the crisis threatening Amanda's career. But as I stood there listening to my family's public criticism and demands for my assistance, I realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. They wanted me to save them from a crisis they'd created through years of systematic dismissal of my actual achievements. They needed me to contact myself to preserve business relationships that existed only because of my hidden contributions to their success. And they were demanding this assistance while publicly positioning me as the family failure whose attitude problems had always held everyone back. The disconnect between their desperate need for my help and their continued refusal to acknowledge my worth had reached a breaking point that could no longer be sustained. Something was about to change forever, and everyone in the room was about to discover just how thoroughly they'd misunderstood everything about me. Patricia checked her phone and looked up at the room with the expression of someone about to close a major business deal. "I've just received confirmation from our board," she announced with corporate finality. "Alternative Digital Solutions CEO will be here in 40 minutes for emergency contract signing. Unless we can establish immediate contact with F. Morrison, we're moving forward with the backup provider." The news hit Amanda like a physical blow. Her face crumpled as she realized that her career-defining contract was about to evaporate, taking with it not just the $8 million in design work, but also her reputation as someone who could deliver on major projects. 40 minutes, Amanda repeated in a broken whisper. My contract disappears in 40 minutes. Derek's response to this devastating news was to explode in frustrated rage, directed squarely at the person he'd decided was responsible for the family's failure to resolve the crisis. This is unbelievable, he shouted, wheeling around to face me with unconcealed fury. We've been trying to save Amanda's career for over an hour, and you've been absolutely useless. His voice carried across the entire party, causing conversations to stop and guests to turn their attention toward what was clearly becoming a family meltdown in front of some of Denver's most influential business leaders. All we asked was for you to use whatever pathetic computer skills you have to help us contact one person. Derek continued, his voice rising with each word. One simple task that might actually contribute something meaningful to this family's success for the first time in your life. Margaret joined Derek's public attack with her own version of disappointed maternal authority. Frida, I am ashamed of your behavior tonight, she declared loudly enough for every guest to hear. When your sister needed you most, you chose to be selfish and unhelpful. Robert stepped forward to add his own contribution to the family's public humiliation campaign. This is exactly what we've been talking about for years, he announced to the room. Frida has never learned how to put family success ahead of her own petty concerns. The wealthy party guests were shifting uncomfortably clearly, recognizing that they were witnessing inappropriate family dynamics, but uncertain whether to leave or pretend not to notice the escalating confrontation. But Derek wasn't finished destroying my dignity in front of the most important business contacts his family had ever encountered. You know what the real problem is, he said, pointing directly at me with theatrical disgust. Frida can't stand seeing Amanda succeed because it highlights her own complete failure to build anything meaningful with her life. The accusation hung in the air like poison, designed to explain to the hotel executives and influential guests why the family crisis couldn't be resolved. Derek was essentially telling the room that jealousy and personal inadequacy had made me unwilling to help save my sister's career. James moved closer to me, his face showing barely controlled anger at the public humiliation I was enduring. Frida, this has gone far enough, he said quietly, but with unmistakable steel in his voice. You don't have to tolerate this abuse from people who don't understand what you've accomplished. But before I could respond, Derek delivered the final insult that would change everything forever. His face was red with rage and frustration, his voice filled with the kind of contempt that comes from years of accumulated resentment and class consciousness that had always bubbled beneath the surface of our family relationships. You want to know what Frida's real problem is, he announced to the entire room, including the hotel executives, the wealthy guests, and the business contacts he'd spent all evening trying to impress. He pointed directly at me with undisguised disgust and spoke with the kind of vicious clarity that couldn't be taken back or explained away. Trash, he said with devastating finality. She's just trash who can't stand being around successful people because it reminds her of everything she'll never achieve. The word hung in the air like a slap, reducing me to less than human in front of a room full of people who represented the pinnacle of Denver's business and social establishment. So instead of helping when her family needs her most, Derek continued with relentless cruelty. She's going to stand there pouting while Amanda's career gets destroyed because of her selfish attitude. Margaret nodded approvingly at Derek's harsh assessment, adding her own public endorsement of this devastating character assassination. Derek's right, she said with the tone of someone finally stating an uncomfortable truth. Some people just can't handle being around real achievement and success. But Derek wasn't finished delivering his public verdict on my worth as a human being. Trash, he repeated, making sure everyone in the room understood his assessment. That's all she's ever been, and that's all she'll ever be. He gestured dismissively toward the kitchen area where I'd been relegated throughout the evening. "You know what would actually be helpful?" he said with cruel sarcasm. "If she would stop pretending to be important and go do what she's actually good for." Derek's voice took on the commanding tone he used when giving orders to subordinates and service personnel. "Go serve drinks to our guests," he commanded with public authority designed to demonstrate my inferior status to everyone present. At least then, you'd be contributing something useful instead of just taking up space and making everyone uncomfortable. The command was delivered with such contempt and authority that several guests actually looked toward the kitchen area, apparently expecting me to comply with Derek's order to assume servant status for the remainder of the evening. Robert reinforced Derek's directive with his own version of patriarchal authority. "That's exactly right," he said approvingly. "Make yourself useful for once instead of being a burden on family success." Amanda, despite her own desperate panic about losing her contract, couldn't resist adding her own contribution to the public humiliation. "Maybe helping with party service would teach you something about contributing to successful events instead of always being the family disappointment," she said with tears in her eyes, but tears of frustration rather than sympathy. The hotel executives were watching this family meltdown with obvious discomfort, clearly questioning whether they wanted to do business with people who treated family members with such public cruelty. But Derek was completely oblivious to the professional damage he was doing to his own reputation as he delivered his final public verdict on my worth. "Trash," he said one more time, making sure the word was burned into the memory of everyone present. "Go serve our important guests and stop wasting everyone's time with your pathetic attempts to seem relevant." The room fell into shocked silence as the full impact of Derek's public humiliation settled over the party. Several guests were looking toward the exit, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing such brutal family dynamics. James's face had gone completely white with rage as he processed the fact that his business partner, the CEO of a $15 million company, had just been called trash and ordered to serve drinks at her own sister's party. Patricia and her hotel executive colleagues were exchanging glances that suggested serious concerns about the professionalism and character of the people they'd been considering as business partners. But as I stood there in the center of Amanda's living room holding my phone while my family's contempt and dismissal crashed over me like a wave, I realized that this moment represented something much more significant than personal humiliation. This was the moment when years of hidden truth would finally collide with public reality in ways that would change every relationship in the room forever. Derek had just called the CEO of Morrison Technologies trash and ordered her to serve drinks while his family desperately tried to contact that same CEO to save their business relationships. The irony was so complete, so devastating, and so perfectly timed that I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen to all of them. I looked around the room one final time, taking in the faces of the hotel executives who controlled Amanda's contract, the wealthy guests who represented Derek's networking aspirations, the family members who'd just publicly destroyed my dignity in front of the most important audience they'd ever assembled. Then I lifted my phone and spoke with the calm authority of someone who'd been quietly building an empire while everyone else had been celebrating illusions. "Cancel the $80 million Grandview infrastructure deal." The words, "cancel the $80 million Grandview infrastructure deal," fell into the shocked silence of Amanda's living room like a bomb, creating a moment of complete stillness where nobody seemed to breathe, move, or even blink. I held my phone steady, speaking clearly into the device that Derek had dismissed as a cheap phone, and my family had repeatedly told me to turn off during their desperate search for the person who controlled their professional destinies. Morrison Technologies. This is Frida Morrison. I continued with the calm authority of someone accustomed to making decisions worth millions of dollars. I need immediate cancellation of all contracts and preliminary agreements related to the Grandview Hotel's Pacific Northwest expansion project. Derek's face went through a series of rapid expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror as the implications began sinking into his consciousness. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, like someone trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he understood about reality. My assistant Sarah's voice came through the phone speaker, crisp and professional despite the late hour. "Ms. Morrison, I need to confirm this instruction. You're requesting cancellation of the full Grandview partnership, including the 6-property infrastructure installation, the guest experience platform, implementation, and all related service agreements." Naive. "Confirmed." I replied, maintaining eye contact with Derek as the blood drained from his face. "Effective immediately. Send cancellation notices to all Grandview executives and CC our legal team for contract termination procedures." Patricia, who had been standing near the fireplace discussing backup providers with her colleagues, suddenly stopped mid-conversation and turned toward me with an expression of complete shock. "Ms. Morrison," she repeated faintly, staring at me as if seeing a ghost. "Frida Morrison." James stepped forward with a smile that contained zero warmth and approximately 10 years' worth of suppressed anger at witnessing my family's treatment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the room with formal precision, "I'd like you all to meet my business partner, Frida Morrison, founder and CEO of Morrison Technologies." The impact of this revelation hit different people in waves of recognition and horror. Margaret was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. That's impossible. Frida works in tech support." "Actually," James replied with steel-edged courtesy, "Frida founded Morrison Technologies 3 years ago after leaving her senior position at Integrated Solutions. She's built the company into one of the most successful technology consulting firms in the Western United States." Robert was staring at me as if I'd just revealed myself to be an alien from another planet. But the F. Morrison everyone was looking for. "Frida Morrison," James confirmed with obvious satisfaction. "CEO of a company that generates approximately $15 million in annual revenue and maintains exclusive partnerships with luxury hospitality brands, Fortune 500 corporations, and municipal governments." Amanda had collapsed into one of her designer chairs, her face completely white, as she processed the devastating reality that the sister she'd dismissed as a failure was actually the person who controlled her professional destiny. "You recommended my firm to Grandview Hotels," she said in a broken whisper. "You arranged my biggest contract." I nodded calmly, maintaining the composed demeanor I used during difficult business negotiations. "Yes, Amanda. I thought your design work was excellent, and I wanted to help your career by connecting you with clients who could benefit from your talents." Derek was still staring at my phone as if it might transform back into the cheap device he'd mocked earlier in the evening. "The $80 million deal," he managed to say. "You just canceled an $80 million deal." I did. I confirmed with the matter-of-fact tone I used when discussing routine business decisions. Morrison Technologies no longer has any interest in working with Grandview Hotels, which means their Pacific Northwest expansion project loses the technological infrastructure that justified the entire investment. Patricia found her voice, though it shook with obvious panic. "Ms. Morrison, surely this is some kind of misunderstanding. The cancellation affects not just our technology partnership, but also our design contracts, construction schedules, and investor commitments." "I understand the implications completely," I replied with professional courtesy. "Morrison Technologies takes partnership relationships very seriously. When we encounter situations that suggest potential problems with professional respect and communication, we prefer to discontinue engagements rather than risk project complications." Michael stepped forward with desperate urgency. "Ms. Morrison, please, can we discuss this privately? Perhaps there's been some miscommunication that we can resolve." "Actually, there's been no miscommunication at all," I said, looking directly at Derek, who was still frozen in shock. "The situation has been remarkably clear and transparent." James decided to provide additional context that made the scope of the catastrophe even more obvious. I should mention that Grandview Hotel's expansion project was entirely dependent on Morrison Technologies' infrastructure implementation. He explained to the room with clinical precision. Without our smart building systems, automated guest services, and operational efficiency platforms, their properties become standard hotels with luxury interior design, rather than the technologically advanced destinations that justified their premium investment strategy. David, who had been silent during the revelation, finally spoke with the hollow voice of someone watching millions of dollars evaporate in real time. The board approved this expansion specifically because of the technological capabilities Morrison Technologies promised to deliver. Without those systems, the entire project becomes financially unviable. Amanda made a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of the evening. "Frida, please," she begged with tears streaming down her face. "I know we haven't always understood your work, but surely you won't destroy my career because of family misunderstandings." I looked at my sister with the sad composure of someone who'd finally stopped hoping for recognition that would never come voluntarily. "Amanda, I spent 3 years trying to tell our family about Morrison Technologies' success. I shared news articles, showed you business awards, invited everyone to company celebrations. Each time I was told I was delusional, making up stories or exaggerating small accomplishments to compete with your achievements." Margaret started to speak, but I continued before she could interrupt. "I arranged your Grandview contract because I wanted you to succeed. I recommended your firm specifically because I thought you deserved recognition for your design talents. But even when you benefited directly from my business relationships, none of you were curious enough to ask how a supposedly failed sister had connections with luxury hotel executives." Robert attempted to offer some version of an apology that might prevent further business catastrophe. "Frida, we may have misunderstood some details about your work, but surely we can discuss this as a family and find a solution that benefits everyone." "The time for family discussions was 3 years ago when I founded the company," I replied with finality. "Or 2 years ago when we landed our first major municipal contract. Or 18 months ago when Colorado Business Magazine featured us as one of the state's fastest-growing firms. Or 8 months ago when I invited everyone to our anniversary celebration." James provided the devastating context that made clear this wasn't a momentary business decision. Morrison Technologies operates on the principle that respect and communication are essential elements of successful partnerships. He explained to the hotel executives who were watching their expansion project disintegrate. "When those elements are absent, we've learned that projects inevitably encounter problems that damage everyone involved." Patricia made one final desperate appeal. "Ms. Morrison, surely personal family dynamics shouldn't affect legitimate business relationships. Grandview Hotels has been a reliable partner, and our expansion project would benefit thousands of guests and hundreds of employees." I considered her point with the same careful analysis I applied to all major business decisions. "You're right that Grandview Hotels has been professional in our direct business relationship," I acknowledged. "But tonight's events have revealed communication and respect issues that suggest potential problems with project coordination and timeline management." I gestured around the room at my family members who were still processing the reality of their situation. "The people who've been desperately trying to contact me for the past 2 hours didn't recognize me when I was standing directly in front of them. That level of awareness and attention to detail doesn't suggest the kind of partnership environment where complex technological integration projects succeed." Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "You're destroying Amanda's career to punish us for not understanding your business." "No, Derek," I replied with the cold precision of someone who'd reached the end of their patience. "I'm protecting Morrison Technologies from partnerships with people who've demonstrated they don't value respectful communication and professional recognition." I looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of family members who were finally seeing me clearly for the first time in my adult life. "You called me trash," I said directly to Derek. You ordered me to serve drinks to your important guests. You told a room full of business leaders that I was the family failure whose jealousy and inadequacy had prevented me from achieving anything meaningful. The words hung in the air like an indictment, forcing everyone to confront the reality of what they'd said and done, while the CEO of a $15 million company listened quietly. Those aren't the words and actions of people who understand partnership respect or professional collaboration. I concluded with devastating finality. And as the full implications of their situation began sinking in, I realized that the consequences of tonight's revelations would extend far beyond a canceled business contract. The immediate aftermath of my revelation created a ripple effect of consequences that spread through the room like a seismic shock, destroying business relationships and professional reputations with devastating efficiency. Patricia was the first to fully grasp the scope of what had just happened. As Senior Vice President of Development for Grandview Hotels, she understood that the cancellation of Morrison Technologies' $80 million infrastructure contract didn't just affect one project, it potentially destroyed the entire Pacific Northwest expansion that her company had spent 2 years planning and promoting to investors. "Ms. Morrison," she said with barely controlled panic, "our board meeting starts in 20 minutes. How do I explain to investors that our flagship technological partner has withdrawn from a project that was approved specifically because of the competitive advantages your systems would provide?" Before I could respond, Michael stepped forward with his own version of corporate crisis management. The operational efficiency improvements, guest experience platforms, and revenue optimization systems Morrison Technologies promised were the foundation of our entire business model, he said with growing desperation. "Without those capabilities, our projected returns drop by 60%, making the expansion financially unjustifiable." David added the most devastating piece of financial context. Our construction loans and investor commitments were approved based on revenue projections that assumed Morrison Technologies' smart building implementations would be operational from day one. Without that technological infrastructure, we're looking at standard hotel performance in markets that already have significant luxury competition. But the consequences for Grandview Hotels were just the beginning of a cascade of professional disasters that would affect everyone who had participated in tonight's humiliation. Amanda was the first family member to understand that the cancellation of Morrison Technologies' contract meant the automatic termination of her design agreement. The interior design work she'd been celebrating all evening existed only within the framework of a technological infrastructure project that I'd just canceled. "My contract?" she said in a broken whisper, staring at me with dawning comprehension. "When your infrastructure deal disappears, my design contract becomes worthless." "That's correct," I confirmed with the professional courtesy I used when explaining complex business relationships to clients. Grandview Hotels' design requirements were specifically tailored to accommodate Morrison Technologies' smart building systems. Without our infrastructure, they need completely different interior planning that focuses on traditional hotel functionality rather than integrated technological capabilities. Patricia nodded grimly, confirming Amanda's worst fears. "Ms. Chambers, I'm sorry, but Ms. Morrison is right. Our design specifications were entirely dependent on the technological systems that are no longer available. We'll need to start over with design firms that specialize in conventional luxury accommodations." The $8 million contract that had been the centerpiece of tonight's celebration vanished in a single sentence, taking with it not just Amanda's biggest professional achievement, but also her reputation as someone who could deliver on major projects. But the destruction was far from over. Derek's face had gone from white to green as he began calculating the business implications of what had just transpired. His own construction company had been hoping to bid on infrastructure work related to the Grandview expansion relationships he'd been cultivating all evening with the specific goal of positioning himself for major contract opportunities. "The construction contracts," he said faintly, pulling out his phone to check messages from his business partners. We were planning to bid on the electrical structural modifications and site preparation work for all 6 properties. James provided the context that made Derek's situation even worse. Morrison Technologies typically influences construction partnerships for our major installations, he explained with clinical precision. We work with contractors who understand integrated building systems and can coordinate complex technological implementations. Since we're no longer involved with Grandview, we won't be providing any recommendations for construction partnerships. Derek stared at his phone as text messages arrived from his business partners asking about the status of the Grandview opportunities they'd been depending on for their annual revenue projections. This was supposed to be our biggest year, he said in a hollow voice. We hired additional staff, leased new equipment, and made financial commitments based on the projected Grandview contracts. But the professional catastrophe was spreading beyond immediate family members to affect everyone who'd built their business relationships on assumptions about family success and connections. Robert was receiving urgent phone calls from clients who'd attended tonight's party and witnessed the family meltdown that resulted in the cancellation of an $80 million deal. As a business consultant who marketed himself based on his family's professional achievements, tonight's events had destroyed his credibility with some of Denver's most influential business leaders. Mr. Henderson just canceled our contract, Robert announced after finishing a particularly difficult phone call. He said he can't work with an accountant whose family relationships are so unstable that they interfere with major business partnerships. Margaret was facing her own version of professional consequences as word spread among the party guests about what they'd witnessed. Her catering company depended on referrals and reputation among Denver's social and business elite, many of whom had just watched her participate in the public humiliation of someone who turned out to be a major business leader. Mrs. Patterson from the Denver Art Museum Board just called, Margaret said, with obvious distress. She's reconsidering Elite Catering for their annual fundraising gala because she's concerned about our professionalism and family dynamics. The hotel executives were conducting urgent phone calls with their corporate offices, trying to explain how a celebration party had turned into a business disaster that threatened one of their most significant expansion projects. But the most devastating consequences were still developing as word of the evening's events began spreading through Denver's interconnected business community. James pulled me aside to share information that revealed the broader scope of what tonight's cancellation would mean for everyone involved. Frida. I've been getting calls from our other hotel clients who heard about the Grandview situation, he said quietly. 3 major chains are asking about our partnership policies and whether family conflicts affect our business relationships. I realized that my family's public treatment of me hadn't just destroyed their own opportunities, it had created potential problems for Morrison Technologies' broader client relationships. Hotel executives who'd witnessed or heard about tonight's events were questioning whether our company had the stability and professionalism they expected from major vendors. We're going to need to do some serious reputation management, James continued. The industry is small enough that tonight's events will be discussed in boardrooms across the country within 48 hours. But even as I processed the broader implications for my own business, I couldn't escape the immediate reality that my family's years of dismissive treatment had finally produced consequences they couldn't ignore or explain away. Derek was still staring at his phone, watching potential contracts and business opportunities disappear as his partners realized that the Grandview connections they'd been counting on were never going to materialize. Amanda was sobbing quietly in her designer chair, understanding that her career-defining moment had transformed into a cautionary tale that would follow her throughout the hospitality design industry. Robert and Margaret were dealing with immediate client relations crises as their own businesses suffered from association with the family dynamics that had destroyed a major corporate partnership. The wealthy party guests were quietly departing, clearly uncomfortable with having witnessed such unprofessional behavior and eager to distance themselves from people whose family conflicts had interfered with million-dollar business relationships. Patricia approached me one final time, her expression showing the grim determination of someone trying to salvage what remained of a corporate disaster. Ms. Morrison, I understand that tonight's events were personally difficult, but is there any possibility that Morrison Technologies might reconsider this decision? Our investors' employees and development plans all depend on projects like this succeeding. I looked around the room at my family members who were each dealing with the immediate consequences of years of accumulated disrespect and dismissal that had finally reached a breaking point. Patricia, I appreciate your position and I respect Grandview Hotels as a company, I replied with genuine regret. But Morrison Technologies has learned that successful partnerships require mutual respect and professional communication from the beginning of relationships, not just when million-dollar contracts are at stake. As the hotel executives prepared to leave for their emergency board meeting, where they would have to explain how a celebration party had destroyed their expansion project, I realized that tonight's consequences would reshape every relationship in ways that couldn't be undone. But perhaps that was exactly what needed to happen for real change to begin. The immediate crisis had passed, leaving Amanda's living room nearly empty, except for family members who were sitting in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The hotel executives had departed for their emergency board meeting. The wealthy guests had quietly excused themselves from what had become an uncomfortable family confrontation, and the catering staff had begun cleaning up the remnants of what was supposed to have been a celebration. I stood near the marble fireplace, still holding my phone, watching my family members as they slowly began to comprehend that the evening's revelations required fundamental changes in how we related to each other. The power dynamics that had governed our relationships for years had been completely inverted, and everyone was struggling to understand what came next. Derek was the first to attempt some form of reconciliation, though his approach revealed that he still didn't fully grasp the depth of hurt and disrespect his actions had caused. "Frida, I think we need to talk about what happened tonight," he said with the careful tone of someone trying to negotiate their way out of a business crisis. Obviously, there were some misunderstandings and communication problems that got out of hand. I looked at him with the patient expression I used when clients tried to minimize serious problems that required substantial corrections. "Derek, what happened tonight wasn't a misunderstanding or communication problem," I replied with gentle firmness. "You called me trash in front of hotel executives and business leaders, then ordered me to serve drinks at my own sister's party. Those were deliberate choices that reflected years of accumulated contempt and dismissal." The words hit him like physical blows, forcing him to confront the reality that his actions had consequences beyond hurt feelings or family discord. Amanda stood up from her chair, tears still streaming down her face, and approached me with the hesitant manner of someone attempting to rebuild a relationship from complete ruins. "Frida, I need to apologize for everything," she said with genuine remorse in her voice. "I had no idea about Morrison Technologies, about your success, about any of it. I feel like I've been living in complete ignorance about my own sister's life and achievements." She paused, struggling to find words that could somehow address years of systematic dismissal and condescension. "I realized tonight that I've been so focused on building my own career that I never actually listened when you tried to tell us about yours. I was threatened by the possibility that you might be succeeding because it challenged my role as the successful daughter, so I convinced myself that your achievements weren't real." Amanda's honesty was painful but necessary, representing the first time she'd acknowledged the competitive dynamics that had driven much of our family's dysfunction. "I sabotaged family conversations about your work because I was afraid that if everyone knew how successful you really were, they might not think my achievements were as impressive," she continued with brutal self-awareness. "I was protecting my status as the family success story by keeping you invisible." Margaret moved closer to our conversation, her face showing the deep shame of someone confronting their own failures as a parent and supporter. "Frida, I don't know how to apologize for what I've put you through," she said with tears in her eyes. For years, you tried to share your accomplishments with us, and I dismissed everything you said because it didn't match what I thought I knew about your life." She gestured around the elegant living room that represented everything the family valued about success and achievement. I was so invested in Amanda's version of success, the visible markers like this house and expensive parties, that I couldn't recognize a different kind of achievement that you'd built quietly and independently. Robert joined the growing circle of family members attempting to process their own roles in creating the crisis that had destroyed everyone's business relationships. "Frida, I failed you as a father," he said with the heavy voice of someone accepting responsibility for years of poor judgment. "I let my assumptions about business and success blind me to what you were actually accomplishing. I treated you like an underperforming employee instead of recognizing that you'd built something far more substantial than anything I'd achieved." He paused, looking around at the remnants of the party that had cost everyone so much. "Tonight I watched you make decisions involving more money than I've earned in my entire career, while I offered you $5,000 as if it was life-changing charity. The disconnect between my perceptions and your reality is so complete that I'm questioning everything I thought I understood about our family." James, who had been observing this family reckoning with the patience of someone who understood that real change took time and honest reflection, stepped forward to provide context that helped everyone understand the broader implications of what they needed to address. "I want you all to know that Frida has never spoken negatively about any of you during our 3-year partnership," he said with sincere respect for my character. "Even when I could see that family relationships were causing her pain, she always emphasized your positive qualities and expressed hope that understanding would improve over time." His words seemed to increase rather than decrease my family's sense of guilt and regret. "What I witnessed tonight was completely inconsistent with the person I know as my business partner," James continued. "Frida is respected throughout our industry for her professionalism, intelligence, and collaborative approach to complex projects. The way she was treated here tonight would be unacceptable in any professional environment, let alone in a family setting." Derek's face had been growing increasingly red as he processed the full scope of his behavior and its consequences. "I destroyed my wife's career and my own business prospects because I was too arrogant to recognize success that didn't look like what I expected," he said with bitter self-recrimination. "I called someone trash who was managing business relationships worth more than I'll earn in my lifetime. But the most important part of the evening came when I realized that my family's apologies and self-reflection, while necessary, were only the beginning of rebuilding relationships that could function with mutual respect and genuine support. I appreciate everyone's willingness to acknowledge what went wrong tonight," I said, looking around at faces that showed genuine remorse and confusion about how to move forward. "But I need you all to understand that this isn't just about one evening of misunderstandings." I sat down in one of Amanda's chairs, encouraging everyone else to sit as well so we could have the kind of honest conversation that should have happened years ago. For 3 years, I tried to share my achievements with this family, not to compete with Amanda or diminish anyone else's success, but because I wanted to celebrate accomplishments with the people I love most. Every time I was told I was delusional, making up stories, or exaggerating small achievements to get attention. The pain of those repeated dismissals was still fresh even after tonight's vindication. I started keeping my success private because it was easier than constantly defending my reality against your assumptions about my capabilities and worth. But privacy became isolation, and isolation made it possible for you to create completely false narratives about my life. Amanda nodded with obvious understanding. We created a family mythology where you were the struggling sister and I was the successful one. And then we defended that mythology even when evidence contradicted it. Exactly, I confirmed. And tonight, when you desperately needed help from the successful person you'd been ignoring for years, you didn't recognize that person because you'd invested so much energy in not seeing me clearly. Margaret spoke up with the voice of someone finally understanding the depth of damage that needed to be addressed. How do we rebuild from here, Frida? How do we learn to see and support each other accurately instead of protecting comfortable illusions about family roles? I considered her question carefully, recognizing that genuine change would require sustained effort and new patterns of interaction. We start with honesty about who we actually are instead of who we wish we were or who we think we should be, I said. Amanda is genuinely talented at interior design, and her work deserves recognition for its own merits. Derek has legitimate business skills that don't require anyone else to fail for him to succeed. You and Dad have built successful enterprises that can stand on their own without needing to diminish my achievements. Robert nodded slowly. And you've built something extraordinary that deserves celebration and support rather than skepticism and dismissal. Yes, but more importantly, we all need to learn that success isn't a zero-sum game where one person's achievements diminish everyone else's value. I continued. The competitive dynamics that made Amanda feel threatened by my accomplishments and that made Derek feel justified in calling me trash, those patterns will destroy relationships regardless of who's successful or unsuccessful at any given time. Derek stood up and walked to the window overlooking Amanda's neighborhood, his shoulders sagging with the weight of understanding what he'd lost through his own actions. "I've been thinking about this all wrong," he said quietly. I treated family relationships like business competitions where someone had to win and someone had to lose. I made Frida into the family failure because it made Amanda's success seem more impressive, and it made me feel better about my own achievements. He turned back toward our group with obvious determination to change fundamental patterns. "But you built something incredible while we were busy dismissing you, and you still tried to help Amanda's career by connecting her with Grandview Hotels. That's not competitive behavior, that's generous family support that I was too blind to recognize or appreciate." Amanda stood up as well, moving to stand beside Derek as they faced me together. "Frida, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," she said with nervous courage. "Is there any possibility that Morrison Technologies might reconsider the Grandview partnership? Not to save my contract specifically, but because you believe the project has genuine value that extends beyond tonight's family problems." I appreciated her willingness to separate her personal interests from larger business considerations, recognizing that my decision affected hundreds of employees and thousands of future guests beyond our immediate family. "Amanda, that's exactly the right question to ask," I replied with genuine respect for her growth in understanding complex business relationships. Morrison Technologies' partnership decisions are based on professional criteria, not personal emotions or family dynamics. I stood up and retrieved my phone, considering the various factors that would influence a major corporate decision. The Grandview Hotels expansion project is professionally sound, the hotel executives have been respectful business partners, and the technological integration would benefit both our company and their guests. The problem was never with the business relationship itself. James moved closer to our conversation, understanding that I was processing a complex decision that would affect Morrison Technologies' reputation and relationships throughout the hospitality industry. The question is whether tonight's events suggest communication and respect issues that could affect project coordination. He said, providing the business framework that would guide our decision. We've learned that family dynamics can interfere with professional relationships in ways that create operational risks. I looked around at my family members who were listening with obvious hope, but also with new understanding that business decisions couldn't be influenced by emotional appeals or family loyalty. However, I continued slowly. If everyone involved can demonstrate that tonight's problems were isolated events rather than ongoing patterns, and if the family dynamics can be completely separated from professional relationships, then Morrison Technologies might be willing to reconsider our position. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of what I was offering. Derek was the first to speak his voice, showing new respect for the complexity of business relationships and personal accountability. What would Morrison Technologies need to see in order to feel confident that family issues won't interfere with professional coordination? He asked with genuine humility. Complete separation of business and personal relationships, I replied with corporate precision. Amanda's design work would be evaluated purely on professional criteria. Family members would have no involvement in business communications or decision-making, and all project coordination would happen through normal corporate channels. Amanda nodded eagerly. I can absolutely work within those parameters. In fact, I think my design work will be better when it's not complicated by family dynamics and personal assumptions. Margaret and Robert exchanged glances before Robert spoke for both of them. We understand that our business relationships with Morrison Technologies need to be professional rather than personal, he said with newfound respect for boundaries and appropriate business behavior. We won't assume family connections give us special access or influence over corporate decisions. James pulled out his phone to check recent messages from our corporate team. Actually, Frida, I've been getting calls from several other hotel chains who heard about tonight's events, he said with a slight smile. They're specifically impressed that Morrison Technologies prioritizes professional respect and communication over financial considerations. 2 major chains have requested meetings to discuss potential partnerships based on our reputation for principled business practices. The information added an important perspective to our decision-making process. Morrison Technologies' willingness to walk away from unprofessional relationships was actually enhancing our reputation rather than damaging it. In that case, I said with growing confidence in the decision, I think Morrison Technologies can contact Grandview Hotels tomorrow morning to discuss reinstating our partnership under clearly defined professional parameters. The relief on everyone's faces was immediate and obvious, but I wanted to make sure they understood that this decision represented a new beginning rather than a return to old patterns. But I need everyone to understand that this is contingent on permanent changes in how we interact as a family, I said with gentle but firm authority. The competitive dynamics, the dismissive attitudes, the assumptions about each other's capabilities, all of that needs to be replaced with genuine respect and support. Amanda stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Frida, I promise you that I will never again dismiss or minimize your achievements. I want to celebrate your success because I'm proud to be your sister, not because I feel threatened by your accomplishments. Derek joined her commitment with his own version of accountability. And I promise that I will never again treat you or anyone else in this family with disrespect, regardless of how stressed or frustrated I might be about business situations. What I said tonight was unacceptable, and I will spend as long as necessary earning back your trust and respect. Margaret and Robert added their own pledges to change patterns that had caused so much damage. We promise to listen when you share your life and achievements with us and to support your success with the same enthusiasm we show for Amanda's accomplishments, Margaret said with obvious determination. And we promise to recognize that different types of success deserve equal respect and celebration, Robert added. Your achievements are extraordinary, and we should have been honoring them for years. As my family made these commitments to change, I realized that tonight's crisis had actually created an opportunity for relationships that were healthier, more honest, and more supportive than anything we'd experienced before. I believe you all mean these commitments sincerely, I said with genuine warmth, and I'm willing to rebuild our relationships based on the new understanding we've developed tonight. I paused to look around at each family member, seeing them more clearly than I had in years. But I also want you to know that regardless of what happens with business relationships or family dynamics, I'm proud of what I've built with Morrison Technologies. I'm proud of the employees whose careers depend on our success, the clients who trust us with major investments, and the innovations we've created that improve people's experiences. James nodded approvingly. You should be proud, Frida. You've built something exceptional that creates value for thousands of people. That pride doesn't depend on family recognition or approval, I continued. I learned tonight that my worth isn't determined by other people's perceptions or acknowledgement. I built Morrison Technologies because I believed in the vision and the possibilities, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone. Amanda stepped forward with obvious emotion. That's the most important lesson from tonight. Your success exists independently of our recognition, but our family relationships will be so much stronger when we celebrate each other's achievements honestly, rather than competing or dismissing them. Derek nodded with newfound understanding. And the strength of family relationships should enhance everyone's professional success rather than creating obstacles or complications. As the evening wound down and my family began the process of rebuilding relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, I realized that the most important outcome wasn't the restoration of business contracts or the resolution of immediate crises. The most important outcome was the understanding that authentic relationships require seeing each other clearly, supporting each other's genuine achievements, and replacing competitive dynamics with collaborative celebration of everyone's unique contributions. "There's one more thing I want to share with all of you," I said as we prepared to leave Amanda's house and begin the process of implementing the changes we'd committed to making. Tonight taught me that success without family support is possible, but success with genuine family support is extraordinarily more meaningful and fulfilling. I'm grateful that we found our way to honest communication, even though it required a crisis to get there. Margaret moved closer and hugged me with the warmth and respect I'd been hoping for throughout my adult life. "I'm sorry it took so long for us to see you clearly, Frida, but I'm grateful that you were patient enough to give us the chance to do better." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the evening's events and the lessons that would guide both my personal relationships and my business decisions going forward. Success doesn't require other people's recognition to be real and valuable, but it becomes much more meaningful when it's understood and celebrated by people who matter to you. Family relationships work best when they're based on honest understanding, rather than comfortable illusions about each other's capabilities and worth. Professional success and personal relationships both benefit when they're built on foundations of mutual respect, clear communication, and genuine support for each other's achievements. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for your own worth, even when that means walking away from relationships or opportunities that don't recognize your value. Before I finish sharing this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members or close friends dismissed your achievements or treated you as less capable than you actually were? How did you handle it? Did you find ways to maintain your confidence and continue pursuing your goals, despite the lack of support? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like to help other people find it who might benefit from understanding that their worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition. And if you enjoyed hearing about overcoming family dynamics and building success, despite initial lack of support, please subscribe to hear more stories about finding your path and standing up for your value. Most importantly, please share this story with anyone who might need to be reminded that their achievements matter, regardless of whether they're fully understood or celebrated by the people closest to them. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is help each other recognize that our success is valid and valuable, even when it's not acknowledged by everyone in our lives. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to celebrate your own achievements while also working to build relationships based on honest understanding and genuine support. Remember that authentic success includes both professional accomplishment and personal relationships that recognize and honor your true worth.